I'm on my own, broken alone. I feel the rain crashing down all around this empty town. I'm searching for the lost and found, but you don't care, you're unaware. Keep moving like the scars aren't even there. It's in the air like a blazing flare. Just stare, 'cause the flames will burn us. I thought you were the one for me. That's why I gave you everything. Held you close by the stormy seas. Oh, you meant the world to me. I used to kiss your head when you cried for me. Hold your hand while the pain was over. Keep you warm by the roaring sea. You meant the world to me. Oh, you meant the world to me. Oh, you meant the world to me. My darling dear, you're never here. When I'm in pain, you hide and disappear. Like shadows in the atmosphere, charting the stratosphere. Yeah. I prayed for you and kept you near, in hopes you'd chase away my fears. I'm on my own, you made it so, and now I'm chasing nightmares. I used to run with you through the great big leaves, laugh at you when you laugh at me. Hope for us because I believe the home was just you and me. I thought you were the one for me. That's why I gave you everything. Held you close by the stormy seas. Oh, you meant the world to me. Oh, you meant the world to me. Oh, you meant the world to me. Oh, I'm gonna do this on my own. No point in blaming you, you did not know. Oh, I thought you were the one for me. That's why I gave you everything. Held you close by the stormy seas. Oh, you meant the world to me. Oh, you meant the world to me. Oh, you meant the world to me. Oh, I'm gonna do this on my own. No point in blaming you, you did not know. Oh, I'm gonna do this on my own. No point in blaming you, you did not know. I thought you were the one for me. That's why I gave you everything. Held you close by the stormy seas. Oh, you meant the world to me.
Is on. Transitioning over. Oh, by the way, Jay, I'll do a quick little intro for the podcast, and then I'll pause, and then I'll do another one for the YouTube, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Welcome into Hardcore Penn State Football with Sean and I tonight. Jay Paterno. I started trying to figure out all the titles that I could give him, and I just gave up on it. So we're just gonna go with Jay Paterno because the dude, I feel like, has his hand in like 17 different cookie jars. Got a lot to talk about today. We're gonna break down some of his old film. Gonna talk quarterback development, the current Penn State football tenure, name, image, and likeness, of course, with success with honor. And then the man himself is running for re-election at the Board of Trustees. So we'll finish there. Oh, and by the way, we'll have a defensive back Penn State all-time draft to wrap things up after he heads off. Let's get right into it, everybody. You got a cough, Jay. This would be the perfect time.
Yeah. And by the way, this is iced tea, just in case anybody.
No, that's okay. I'm actually not drinking iced tea, so we're
no, I know.
All right. Welcome into Hardcore Penn State Football. I'm Corey Listoki. With me, as always, the great Sean Kane and Jay Paterno. How are you doing today, everybody?
Doing great. How about you guys?
Doing awesome. Really excited to get into this.
Jay, we brought you on for just one reason. It's just going to be a 5-minute interview. We saw the Coca-Cola truck outside of Curtin Road there. We got to get your hot take. Pepsi or Coke, where should Penn State go?
Well, considering my entire playing career and most of Joe's coaching career, we had Coke breaks during practice. I kid you not. I mean, they had the 10-ounce glass bottles. They'd bring them out in the wooden cases, covered in ice, and it was like the greatest thing you've ever consumed in the middle of a preseason practice. And then you spent the next 15 minutes burping. But no, glass bottle Coke, give me that any day of the week.
That's the right answer.
Okay, sweet. Well, see you next time, everybody. Glad we got that wrapped up.
You know, just for the record, I am not commenting as a Board of Trustee member. I'm just commenting as a human being who believes in all the goodness in the world.
You know, I was thinking about that. Like, Coke would still probably be better from a scientific perspective as far as electrolytes than just water. So, although the carbonation and the cramping might not have helped, you still get some electrolytes from the Coca-Cola. But
trust me, it was awesome.
We'll let James Franklin know that maybe they should get some Coca-Cola at practice. I've heard things like, I remember like Urban Meyer said one time, like competition-wise, like if your team wins a competition, you know, they got the Gatorade or the Powerade or whatever, and the losing squad would get, you know, to drink out of the hose. Why not Coca-Cola? Why not just throw Coca-Cola into the mix?
Well, you can't do the hose anymore because of COVID and all the other stuff. So, I mean, I think of hygiene-wise, everybody drinking from that hose on the fence.
Yes, we had one of those.
Yep. We did too.
Ooh.
Yeah, just people would just go in, poke a new hole, and there you go. Yeah, they don't probably. I get disgusted when I see people on television who put their mouth on the bottle nowadays, to be honest with you. So, we got a lot to talk about tonight, not related to Coke and Pepsi. Film room breakdown. We're going to talk about developing quarterbacks, Penn State football today and now, name, image, and likeness, which I feel like is what everybody wants to talk about in college football. And then you are running for re-election at the Board of Trustees. So we got some questions regarding that, and then we will let you go. I do want to say before we start, you were the executive producer for the NBC show Thon 50 Years for the Kids. They just finished Thon, raise a record number, 15 million plus. Congratulations to them, first of all. But you want to briefly talk about what you guys were doing on that show? Because I obviously did not get a chance to watch it.
Well, about 4 years ago, a guy named Doc Schweitzer, who's a Penn State alum, who was part of the first Thon in 1973. And by the way, that first Thon it was the last couple standing. It was like an old school dance marathon. And it was in Hub Ballroom. They had kegs of beer. They were taking like diet pills, uppers, speed, you name it. Like, they're lucky. He said, we're lucky nobody died. But he came to me and said, we ought to do something where we get Thon on TV. And it kind of languished for a couple of years. And then last year, 6 ABC in Philly, which is owned by Disney, wanted to do something to recognize the 50th anniversary of Thon, and they called us. So we got together we got WNYC in New York, we got NEP in Scranton, we had ABC stations in Harrisburg, State College, and Pittsburgh. We were in 1 out of every 8 homes in the country, and it went really, really well. We won the time slot in Philly and New York on a Saturday night in February, and then we'll see what the numbers were this year for the second year. But the traffic on the Thon donation site went up 400% last year on Saturday. It was the biggest single day they'd ever had online. So we're hoping to make it more and more every year. Next year, we kind of want to go with kind of a game day set in Thon, because it led right into the pep rally. So a lot of fun. It never fails to amaze me. I don't care as much as I love football and the other things, the best activity that goes on in that campus every year is Thon. It's not even close.
On that show, are you guys getting a keg out, doing a keg stand or anything like that?
No. All I do now is we just put the stations together and we let the professionals run with the production of it. Thank God.
No, that's fantastic.
I would not want to be back there calling shots.
Well,
I do my own Nittany Game Week show. We created that one, and that one's enough work. I don't need another one.
Yeah. You and Tom Bradley head that up, and I think one of our questions made it onto the show one week, so that was pretty cool.
Yes.
I'm waiting. I would love to see the Thon show make it down to Auburn, Alabama, but I think that probably won't happen. But I won't hold my breath.
Yeah.
Let's talk film first, because I think that's an easy way to kind of break the ice and kind of get into things. And it is football after all. So you're actually going to disappear for this. So if you need to pick your nose or anything like that, knock yourself out. Just wanted to be. I'm going to start, I guess, chronologically here, and I wanted to start first here with good old Spread HD 2008 Penn State versus Michigan State. I honestly didn't remember Michigan State was ranked that high, but
they beat us. They went on share of the Big Ten title.
Turned on the Jets on a weird day, throwing the football to a wide variety
I watched this game all day today, which I probably shouldn't have done, but I watched the whole thing, and I'm just wondering, if you guys would have lost this game, you guys still would have gone to the Rose Bowl, right? Or what? Ohio State would have gone.
Yeah, see, that's for a career-high 341 yards, slicing apart the Michigan State setback.
I got you.
And so had we lost, we were out of it, and Michigan State would have tied. Ohio State would have gone on the road.
And Ohio State had the tie. Gotcha now. Darryl Clark, I think, threw for 341. He had 5 total touchdowns. I said before we started the show, probably the best offensive performance in your tenure, but if not, it was right up there.
Penn State took a 7-0
so many weapons on this team. The Spread HD, can you just talk about, what that really meant, and then obviously the weapons and kind of the thought behind the whole offense, because it probably was, at least for me, one of my favorites to watch.
Well, I think, if you look back the last 40 years, 40 years that I can remember Penn State offense, the 94 team, best offense, hands down. This is probably number 2. This ended up this offensive group ended up in the top 10, 4 or 5 Big Ten historical categories. And, we got ahead of a lot of teams. Oregon State, we had down 35 points. We blew out some people. But I think the big thing with this group was we had a really intelligent offensive line. We had, I think, 2 academic All-Americans on the offensive line. A.Q. Shipley was the center. And then when you look at us, the skill guys, you had Norwood, Butler, and Williams. And then you had Brett Brackett was kind of a slot, kind of hybrid guy like Gesicki would be these days. He was ahead of his time in that regard. And then you had Evan Royce who go out and run routes. So we had 5 or 6 skill guys that knew what everybody else was doing. And that summer, the summer before, I'd read a book about Bill Russell. And Bill Russell talked about when the Celtics were really good, all 5 guys knew what everybody else was doing. So we taught these guys to understand what everybody was doing on every play. So at halftime, we could take Deion Butler and say, look, we're going to put you in the slot because they're doubling you out here, or we're going to motion here, or we're going to line Derek, you're going to line up in the backfield. You look at like the opening drive of the Illinois game, that ESPN, the magazine, wrote a story just about how many different personnel groups I think if you look at most teams now, they're using 3 or 4 different personnel groups. We were about 15 different personnel groups. And my goal, I was at my first job in college. I was a GA on the defense side of the ball, and you had to break down all the personnel groups, all the formations, all the motions. And I said, look, I want that GA every week to go, oh, God, Penn State. I mean, the number of combinations. So we kept the blocking schemes as simple as we could for the offensive line, and we made those 5 skill guys understand. There were times with Tony Hunt or Evan in 05 or even in 08 where Evan Royster's lined up at fullback because he's out at wideout and Derek Williams in the backfield. Now we got him on the linebacker. So it was just a matter of we were just only limited by how creative we could be. So it was a lot of fun to coach those guys. A lot of fun to have those guys have that ability to move around and make adjustments as we went.
Yeah, and by 08 and Michigan State, that was senior day, Williams and Norwood and Butler, they were all seniors. So they had endless knowledge of the offense. And, like you said, you're able to tell Butler, okay, go on the slot this half. And they can do it because they just know everything like the back of their hand.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story. So when they were freshmen,
this will be good.
Yeah, when they were freshmen, they came in the spring. And they were all Madden guys. So what we did is we took memory cards and we put our playbook terminology and our plays on memory cards. And they played Madden the entire spring using those memory cards. And they became very fluent in the we were ahead of our time. And then we could go in the quarterback room. We had the latest PlayStation, I don't know what it was back then, probably 2 or 3. And we had the big screen, and then we could take the quarterbacks through, and I could call certain defenses and show them this is why you have to go here, this is why you got to go there. So we were actually using simulation before anybody even knew what it was. And the people at EA were like, New York Times did an article on NASCAR racers and us using those. And the people at EA Sports, I knew someone out there really, really well, and they had sent us a bunch of free games to use for simulation. So that's how those guys all got to be so knowledgeable. Was, that instead of Madden, they knew terminology just from playing so much Madden.
That is fantastic stuff. That is that's the stuff we like to hear.
And I still have I think it's a PS2 or whatever it was. Took the memory cards, and so I can go out and do it now if I want to.
Was that you said you're going to send it to us? Is that what you said?
No.
Slicing apart the Michigan State
go with me.
I want to ask you about this play specific. Can you see, by the way? I don't know if you can see.
I got it.
Okay. This is what looks to be like a fake bubble.
This is the deep ball to Butler, isn't it?
Yes, sir. It looks like it's a fake bubble. Then it's a play action draw, and I just feel like this play doesn't get enough credit because this is, I mean, first of all, you can only do this if you have confidence in your offensive line, right? But can you just walk us through this a little bit? Because I saw this play and I was like, holy crap, I totally forgot about this.
Yeah, well, I think with that set, we would get in there and we had a on the line of scrimmage quarterback make a decision, like if they didn't walk out, he could throw the bubble out, we'd take our 8-9 yards. If the guy went out, we'd fake the bubble and hand draw. So you do that a couple of times in the course of the game. You got to keep it good. You got to do something. So we essentially came back, pump faked the bubble, faked the draw. Michigan State safety came screaming down there. Butler does a nice job kind of setting him up like he's going to block him, and then just slips right by him. And again, that goes to some of the brains those guys had and their ability to kind of act, because you got to make it look exactly like the play. And that guy came down. Butler eyed him up like he was going to block him and just hesitated, and that was it. And Butler had 3 catches in that game. They were all for touchdowns in the second half.
Hey, I wasn't going to bring it up because you brought it up. I thought it was worth bringing up. Last touchdown pass, fourth quarter. I believe Pat Devlin actually threw it. So
yeah,
can we
not to, by the way?
Oh, see, I was going to say, wait a second, because we got a lot of the old heads in here like, oh, why are we still throwing the ball in the fourth quarter? I'm like, we got proof that still happened even when Paterno was coaching, and I was
I'll tell you what happened was we put Devlin in, and we wanted to get him some throws. And I said to him, whatever you do not throw it deep. I said, if you throw it deep, that's their last pass of the day. Because, I can tell you, in 05, we go out to Illinois, and we're killing them. And it was, I think they scored the opening the maddest Joe was ever got with me as a coach was out in Illinois in 05, and we had gone up 49-3, and it was the second quarter. We took Mike Robinson out in the second quarter of the game. He had 6 touchdowns accounted for in about 23 minutes of football. So we put Morelli in, and we said, hey, we're going to put him in the last drive of the half. Do you want us to run the offense? And Joe says, yeah, run it. So we run the ball. Now it's like 3rd down and 11. So we didn't get anything fancy. We just got an I formation, play action pass. He fakes it, comes back, throws a corner route. The guy gets down to the 1-yard line. And Joe just lit into Kermit Bugs, who was a GA at the time. You tell them. And so, the whole rest of the half is literally yelling at us through our GAs. So we come down to the locker room, and I'm standing down there. We get down there early, and the players, Mike Robinson, Tony Hunt, they're coming. They are laughing and pointing at us like, you guys are dead. You guys are in so much trouble. And literally for 8 minutes, Joe literally ripped us because he said, Ron Zook just got there. He's trying to build a program. You're embarrassing. I said, Coach, we asked you if you want us to run the offense. You said, run it. He goes, yeah, run it every play. So Morelli is behind us, and you can see he's just like, I'm going to hand the ball off for 30 minutes. We did not throw a pass the entire second half. And it was just like, but he was, that's as mad as he's ever been because he just hated to rub anybody's nose in it.
Well, that's fine. I mean, so I don't really blame Pat Devlin that he's like, hey, I got one shot anyway. At least he made it count. We would have thrown a bunch of 3-step hitches and slants for the rest of that game, but the minute but those receivers were too good. They were going to break a tackle and score anyway.
One good shot, but again, he handed the ball off the rest of the game. So I mean, we had one against Michigan in 08, and we were up 39-17, and we had 3rd and about 15. He threw a screen pass. Devlin threw a screen pass to Stephon Green, who went 80. And we never paid attention to spreads or anything and nobody talked about him back then. And the guy below us in the box is like, thank you. I'm like, what the hell is he thank? I said, what are you thanking us for? Like, because we could hear him and he could hear us because the game was over. When he goes, the spread was whatever, 28 or whatever. You just covered it. I go, oh, well, I didn't realize that was part of the intent here. And it was just a screen pass. So
Stephon Green, I mean, anytime that dude got the ball, I mean, look out because he could go. So that's actually probably a good transition to the next film I have, and that is the 2011 Ohio State game. Pull that up here. 49-yard strike. I'm gonna go back to that one, but we'll get
the middle of the field with Norwell.
Yeah, don't remind
Wildcat situation.
The snap of the Wildcat. Drake gives the ball to Green. 35-30. Here he goes. 15-10-5. Touchdown. Penn State. The Wildcat with Bill Belton.
Funny thing about
to his left. Belton takes the snap.
In 2008, I was in the Army, so we were actually stationed in Germany. And so that game didn't come on until like 1 or 2 in the morning.
Their running game.
And I tried my hardest to stay up for that thing. And I woke up, and I think it just had ended.
Yards.
What happened?
To his left. Block from Green. 25. Swings outside. 30. Cuts inside the block. Avoid to the 32, and he's driven back there.
Wildcat situation.
The snap of the Wildcat.
2011
Drake gives the ball to Green. 35-30.
I've heard rumors, or I've heard, I don't know, rumors, but I've heard stuff along the lines of,
Belton takes the snap.
you guys wanted to implement this sooner, and your dad didn't want to. I've heard you're wanted to implement this sooner,
with
but
their
it was
running
injuries.
game. Curtis Drake took the direct snap and was part of a ground attack that chewed up 239 yards of
break. To his left. Block from Green. 25. Swings outside 30. Cuts inside the block. Avoid to the 32, and he's driven back there.
Wildcat situation.
The snap of the Wildcat. Drake gives the ball to Green. 35-30. Here he goes. 15-10-5. Touchdown. Penn State. The Wildcat with Bill Belton. Green to his left. Belton takes the snap.
He keeps it though.
And so we did it from Green and got inside
the 6-yard line
of the field with their running game. Curtis Drake took the direct snap and was part of a ground attack that chewed up 239 yards
of break. To his left. Block from Green. 25. Swings outside 30. Cuts inside the block. Avoid to the 32, and he's driven back there.
Wildcat situation.
The snap of the Wildcat. Drake gives the ball to Green. 35-30. Here he goes. 15-10-5. Touchdown. Penn State. The Wildcat with Bill Belton. Green to his left. Belton takes the snap.
He keeps it though.
Really creative
got
stuff.
Blocked from Green and got inside the 6-yard line
in the field with their running game. Curtis
You
Drake
don't
took
want
a
to go
direct
to the
snap and was
Wildcat.
part
And
of a
I think you
ground
guys
attack
went
that
up
chewed
the
up
middle with Silas right over the
239
top. You don't
yards.
want to go Wildcat
Right to his left, block from Green, 25, swings outside 30, cuts inside the block of Moy to the 32, and he's driven back there.
Wildcat situation.
The snap of the Wildcat. Drake gives the ball to Green.
I think on third and goal,
Here
that
he
was
goes,
one
15, 10, 5,
Like, I've never seen a quarterback sneak
A
it.
Wildcat with Bill Belton. Green to his left.
Okay.
Belton takes the snap.
He keeps it, though. Got it blocked from Green and got inside the 6-yard line.
The field with their running game. Curtis Drake took the direct snap and was part of a ground attack that chewed up 239 yards of
Drake to his left, block from Green, 25, swings outside 30, cuts inside the block of Moy to the 32, and he's driven back there.
Wildcat situation.
The snap of the Wildcat. Drake gives the ball to Green, 35, 30. Here he goes, 15, 10, 5, touchdown, Penn State. The Wildcat with Bill Belton. Green to his left. Belton takes the snap.
He keeps it, though. Got it blocked from Green and got inside the 6-yard line.
The field with their running game. Curtis Drake took the direct snap and was
It's
part
like
of a
the
ground attack that
we
chewed
call
up
it the trot line formation
239
to
yards
honor
of
Bill Trot line in the
block from Green,
offensive line,
25,
but
swings
the
outside
T
30,
formation.
cuts inside the block
Nothing new that
of
Mike
Moy to
Griffith
the
runs.
32, and he's
In
driven
fact, we
back
just had an
there.
episode
Wildcat
last week on the
situation.
The snap of the
1947 season,
Wildcat.
and a
Drake
lot
gives the
of
ball to Green, 35, 30. Here he goes, 15, 10, 5,
a lot of
touchdown,
opponents
Penn
could
State.
not. We're lining up in the T formation against Penn State.
Well, our goal line set for years was like a half T where we would have two backs and then the third T guy would be on the wing and then we could motion around and get stuff set up. In fact, the game-winning touchdown against Illinois in '94 was kind of a half T. And Kajana Carter was one of the lead blockers for Brian Milne, which, you know, I love Brian Milne, but that just sounds weird saying it. But that's the way these guys were. I mean, they all work for each other. But I think the T stuff they're doing with the tight ends has been a really good wrinkle for them, and really giving them some things. And then, you know, very similar to what we did in '08, we would get into that goal line set and we motioned out and ran Daryl Clark in against Michigan State for a touchdown. We went to empty. They did some of that with the T, breaking the T out and doing that as well this year. So it's been good to see some of the variations of things that they did this year that they did not do a year ago. That's helped them big time.
Hey, sorry for people on YouTube if that volume was too loud on the game volume. That just means you're going to have to go back to the podcast to listen to anything that was maybe a little hard to hear because the podcast does not have that game volume. So you just got to listen twice. But sorry if you missed a little bit of that. If that was too loud for you. But Sean, I know you got something to ask relating to 2008-ish, I'm sure. Or
well,
08-ish,
but little like the Alamo Bowl in 07, you guys lined Daryl Clark up in a similar formation, in a Wildcat-like formation.
Yep.
Why didn't you guys, is there a reason, were you guys considering doing that earlier in the year just to give the offense, you know, kind of a kickstart?
2007, we were a pretty good offensive football team. People don't remember that, but, you know, we played a very difficult schedule. The teams we lost to were all really good teams. In fact, both in 06 and 07, I think we played, of the 8 losses we had, 4 or 5 of them were the top 5 teams. So we just didn't get over the hump on those teams. But going to that bowl game, a couple things happened. Rich Rodriguez had got hired at Michigan. And there was this whole thing about Rich Rod's going to bring the spread to the Big Ten. And we've been running the spread since 2002. And so basically what we decided was, you know, we're going to be heading to that offense in a year. And we said, let's put some of those components in the game for this game, for the Alamo Bowl. Because one of the things you get in the bowl games is sometimes people get bored, you know, when you're practicing. So we wanted to give them something different, something new to look at, and give Texas A&M something they hadn't seen. And then one of the things we wanted to do was, I told Derek Williams after the game, I said, look, if you happen to mention that we're going to run a, quote, spread HD offense next year, I won't be mad at you. And so that was kind of a plant, which then created an entire offseason buzz where our early season opponents were trying to figure out what the hell it meant. And I told Joe we were going to do it. And he said, look, you know, this isn't my style. But I said, look, it's going to help us with recruiting because there's this buzz about Rodriguez. There's this buzz about Ohio State's going to go to spread. We've been running the spread. Let's take away some of that thunder by creating this other element to it. And it was more diverse than what Michigan was doing. They were essentially a quarterback run offense and some play action pass. We had a lot of NFL pass stuff in our offense. So, Joseph, you do it. We better be pretty dang good next year because you can't overpromise and underdeliver. And I said, okay. And we were right. But it did. I remember the guys from Oregon State after we played them, they were calling and going, we spent so much time trying to figure out what the hell was going on. And one of the things we did in 08 that people don't realize is we opened with Coastal Carolina and we showed nothing. Then we got up on Oregon State so fast, we didn't show anything then. Then we played Temple, didn't show anything. And we kind of really kept things under wraps until we really opened the whole thing up against Illinois. And their guys were like, again, you guys ran a bunch of stuff you hadn't shown us and we didn't know. And I said that, that's kind of, we were willing to sacrifice maybe doing some things to impress everybody in the first 3 or 4 games if we didn't need to. And we got up in those teams so fast that we were able to. And Illinois was really good that year. They had Juice Williams. They just come off a Rose Bowl. So, and that was an electric whiteout that night.
So, okay, let me just ask this real quick because it kind of came to my head. A lot of fans will be like at the beginning of the season, oh, we're not showing too much yet. We're not showing everything we have. We got more tricks up the sleeve. And that just made me think, okay, you guys didn't show some things, right? When Penn State was playing Akron or Temple in the early 2000s, we knew you guys weren't showing a lot of things. But I guess my question is, how, like in that case, it seemed pretty deliberate, but how deliberate is it really? And then when do you decide, yeah, we're going to show everything, right? Or like, do you hold things out for November against an Ohio State? Or do you hold things out for, I guess my question is, when do you guys become desperate enough where it's like, actually, everything we got to show it in this game?
Well, we went into those games with the full package, but we got so far ahead of some of them that it became, let's just control the tempo of the game. And one of the things I think that's different now in college football than was then is every coordinator's got an agent who's trying to market them. So their concern is you got to rank in the top 10 in these categories. So there really isn't that, you don't have the leeway to say, okay, I don't care as long as we're winning, because the people that are picking coaches now, a lot of them aren't coaches. It's an AD who's got a business background or a master's in this, or he or she is, and so they're hiring a search firm that's saying, here are your 5 candidates, and they're bringing them in, and it's like, oh, this guy's rep, or they come in, they say, well, I was number 5 in the country in pass offense and number this and number that. Whereas, we never talked about those stats. We didn't care. Like you mentioned the 08 Ohio State game. Joe came into us and said, look, if our punter or our kicker gets on the field at the end of every drive, we're going to win this game. And we had that mentality. And, you learn those lessons. Sometimes you learn those lessons in very difficult situations. In 02, we went out to Ohio State, and our defense was playing great. We had a really good offensive team. We had a 3rd and long on our own end. And had we run the draw, we may have split it. We may not have, but we would have punted, and they probably wouldn't have scored a touchdown. We got greedy. I threw a corner route. Chris Gamble picked it off, runs it back for a pick 6, and that's the game. And if we don't do that, we probably win the game 7-3.
I just literally watched that play this afternoon as well.
So, so 3 years later, we're playing Ohio State, and 6 years later, we're playing out there, and that's in the back of my mind. And in some critical situations, our defense had such good control of the game. We didn't worry about, I got to score 50 points because I got to be ranked in this, or I got to get 500 yards because I want to be ranked this because I'm worried about my next job. Our only job was to win the game. So we actually would dial things. There were games where, you knew you had control of it defensively. And there were other games where Joe would say, hey, we're going to score a lot of points. In 94, Joe told the defensive staff, look, you go after them, and either they score in 3 plays or we get off the field in 3 plays, because I don't want our offense standing next to us and nobody's for 7 minutes at a time, and I don't want no one's going to keep up with us scoring wise. But he was right. That's
interesting that he said that. So it's because to me that's pretty substantial, right? Like that's not his usual line of thinking, from my understanding, right? Like that for him to straight up say, or to maybe go out of his comfort zone enough to say, hey, look, we've won national championships, no offense, with John Schaefer, but now I've got a guy where I can go and basically outscore everybody else. Like, that's a pretty polarizing change of thought there.
Well, if you look at 82, same thing. 1982, people don't realize Penn State was the first team to win a national championship throwing for more yards than they ran for in the history of the game. I mean, people don't understand that. And
John, didn't you say that on a pod like a couple weeks ago?
Yes, I did. Yeah, we were just talking about the 82 team, and I brought that up.
You will win a lot of bets in bars betting on that. People do not know that. In fact, that was the first team to win a national championship playing the nation's toughest schedule. That was a hell of a football team. But that was an offensively tilted, the field was tilted towards that offense, as was 94. I mean, the 94 offense was, people don't realize the top 14 guys on that team, on that offensive side. So you take your second tailback, you take your second fullback, your third wide out, and you look at that and you say those 14 guys, they played 112 years in the NFL combined. That's an average of 8 years. There has not been any other to me, that is the stat that tells you it's the best offense ever played in college football from a talent standpoint. I mean, you had 5 first-team All-Americans on that offense. I mean, it's just incredible. But Joe came in and said, look, I don't want Kerry Collins standing next to me for 7-8 minutes at a time. Get off the field one way or the other. So, cool. I mean, there were times Joe would come in and say, I want you to throw the ball 10 times in a row because they're playing a run. I mean, there was this kind of misperception because we did tend to win games with defense and kicking game, which, it's still proven to be that way. I mean, Georgia's winning national championship playing defense. Michigan's winning the Big Ten right now playing power football and defense, as much as it pains me to say that. But I mean, they've kind of flipped the script on everybody. But he would do what played the strong suit that he had.
Sean, what you got?
Yeah, and I think that's a sign of a good coach. And one of the things that I don't think Joe gets enough credit for is being innovative, especially like you said in 82 when he was younger. But at some point, Jay, do you think, because it took a while to just run things from the shotgun, like Rashard Casey comes to mind. And I mean, do you think they could have been more creative using him? He just sticks out to me a little bit.
Well, Casey, I think, was a little bit ahead of his time in that regard. A lot of people weren't doing that, number one.
No question.
And number
That's
two,
true.
Heading into that season, he had a lot of things hanging over his head because he was falsely accused of getting in an altercation. And that was one of the more, difficult periods of coaching that I've ever been through because, it was really, he was accused of doing something in Hoboken, New Jersey. He didn't. In fact, when they did the lineup, the witness came in and said the guy's not there. They took the witness out and came back, and she said, "Oh yeah, it's that guy." They told her which one to point to. I mean, it was that bad. I mean, it was just absolutely wrong, and to this day, still makes me burn because I would have loved to have been able to go to the NCAA and said this guy should get a 6th year, and now they give it to him because he lost a chunk of that year just dealing with that hanging over his head. So we had to be careful as to how much we did. But there's no question, had he had another year, it would have been incredible. But that was just really one of the things that held us back there.
Let's talk QBs. Well, more QBs, I guess. You have developed, or sometimes maybe your critics would say haven't developed, quarterbacks. And you've been on both sides of it. What, when it comes to quarterback development, is actually important? When you are trying to develop a quarterback, what are you looking for in the guy? What do you want to see early on? Maybe talk a little bit about what maybe a Darryl Clark had. We're all ears as far as what you need to have to be successful as a quarterback in college football.
Well, I think a couple things. Number one, a physical and mental toughness. If you don't have that, you don't have a quarterback. I don't care what everybody says. I mean, Mahomes is talented. There are so many talented guys, but if you've got that if you've got the head for it, you're good. Arm strength obviously is important. I think these days it's really, really tough to win without mobility. I think Penn State will be a little different offensively this year because Clifford had some mobility that Allard doesn't quite have. Not that he doesn't have some, and that's not to be critical of him.
Hey, Jay, I forgot to warn you ahead of time. Anytime you bring up Clifford, we get a lot of Sean Clifford haters. I forgot to mention that ahead of time because I fully support what you're saying, but I just wanted to warn you that.
Oh, listen, at some point, you've been around long enough, which he has. I mean, you're going to have people that, at the end of the day, people are going to be critical, but I think he handled it really well. I'm sure he would be the first to tell you that there are some things he wish he could do differently. I mean, everybody's that way. But I mean, when you look at where you're coming from, Trace McSorley or whether it's Sean Clifford, where they're more mobile and they can get you out of some trouble with their feet. If you're not a mobile quarterback and you're straight drop back, you got to have good people around you. It makes it tougher to be really, really good just individually because, if it's 3rd and 15, you got to throw the ball down the field and left tackle whiffs, you're punting. Whereas guys that are mobile, they can make that guy miss, buy themselves some time. And you're starting to see it in the NFL. You're seeing more and more guys heading that way. Not necessarily that they're running a bunch, but I mean, you look at what Jalen Hurts was able to do, and I don't care what anybody says, he was the most valuable player in the Super Bowl. He didn't win, but I mean, I think he was the best player on the field. And that's not taking anything from Mahomes, because he did what he had to. But I think now you want a guy that's got some mobility if you can get him. If you got it now, if you got a rare talent where that he can stand back and fire the ball all day, and you got good receivers and a good offensive line and good backs, and you got a chance to be really good. But I think those three things, and then you got to have a guy that can adjust. And there's really two different types of in terms of quarterbacks. There's two different types of thinkers. Mike Robinson was probably one of the smartest football players I've ever been around. I mean, not just quarterbacks, but I mean, if you put a concept on the board, he could see it and he would know. But if you turn around and referenced it 3 minutes later or 5 days later, he could go up and draw it from memory and he could say, well, here's where these guys all fit in. And when you would cover defenses, the ability to react quickly is very, very important. That comes from the mental part of it. But he could say, hey, when they blitz from the strong side with a strong safety, they're going to have to rotate the backside safety over if they want to go to 3 deep, or they're going to have the corner jump inside. I mean, so he knew all the way the pieces fit together. And I call those guys field thinkers. And then you have point thinkers that learn this guy does this guy does that, this guy does that guy does this. And those guys take a little bit longer to develop, but sometimes they're really good too because they really are focused on every little detail that way.
I'm going to ask you this question, Jay, and you can answer as much or as little as you want. And not that they didn't have moments of success, but why did Anthony Morelli, why did a Rob Bolden, why did those guys struggle? Obviously, maybe didn't have all the pieces or things around them all the time, but what was the difference, I guess, in those guys not having the same amount of success?
Well, I think with Morelli, number one, I think we were overscheduled early in his career. If you look at his first 4 starts, we played number 2 Notre Dame, and I think at number 4 Ohio State. So we didn't get him off to the kind of start we wanted to. I think also he would have benefited from a 5th year. If I could do one thing differently, I would have gone back and take, redshirt him his freshman year. Because if you look at the 2 years he started, his numbers actually compare favorably to Hackenberg's, who ended up being a 2nd-round pick. So, I mean, if you really look at what he did, he was 18-8 as a starter, but we could have done a little better job with some things around him. But when you really look at it, the end of the Michigan State game in 2007, I've told people 100 times we should have run the ball. We run the ball successfully. I still beat myself up over that game because we could have, and that gives us a little different feel. I mean, he played 2 bowl games, won them both. So he did some good things. I think the expectations were so high that anything less of turning water into wine was not going to be acceptable. And that would be my caution with the fans with Drew Aller. Everybody just let him get in and play. Okay, let him develop. There may be mistakes early in his career, but just calm down. Okay, and don't write off the guy behind him, Prabula. I'm probably mispronouncing his name. That he's a talented football player as well. I mean, everybody's ready to hand it to one guy. They still got to compete, but to that extent, I think he would have benefited from 1 more year. And like I said, if I could do it over, I would have gotten another year. And great guy to work with. Never complained. Took a lot of heat. Never complained about. And I think he also fell into, following Mike Robinson. And Mike had such a great senior year, as well as Mike was so smooth with the media. I mean, probably the best interview we've ever had here at quarterback. And Anthony didn't quite have that, wasn't quite as savvy that way. So it became very easy to kind of, put a lot of things on him. But I think if you really look at the numbers, he played better than people realize. And like I said, would have benefited from a 5th year.
We talked about it, I think maybe a couple episodes ago, Sean. We're talking about Morelli does get a bad rap, mostly because of that one Ohio State game where I feel like that's seared in everyone's mind. Do you have anything you want to add to Rob Bolden? I just want to give you a chance. I didn't want to make it seem like you weren't talking about him if you just forgot.
No. I think when we went to 2011, we realized that neither Rob nor Matt neither one had separated one from the other. And neither one had really gotten, and we felt like Joe went into that knowing he was going to retire. And he knew that we would develop as a team and get better as the season went. And he wanted to leave and he didn't want to make a big deal, didn't want to announce before the season. And he wanted to make sure that whoever took over would have a team that had experience at the key positions. I mean, if you look at the team that we left, even with the transfers, even with the guys that left because of the sanctions, that team could have won the Big Ten. Without all the distractions, they win the Big Ten, even with those guys gone. I mean, the program was in great position when Joe, and that's what he wanted to do. So that year, Rob played some, Matt started some games. It went back and forth because we were really trying to get both of them experience and hoping that one of them would emerge. And as the season went on, then we end up with all the crap that happened. And so it became an almost untenable situation. But if you look at that year when all the stuff went down, we were 8-1. We were 2 games up in the Big Ten, playing really good defense, and with the understanding, if we didn't turn the ball over, we were going to be in the game in the 4th quarter with a chance to win. And Temple that year was a 9-win team, and we didn't play very well that game. But Bolden comes in, hits a 4th and 13, hits a 3rd and long. We make a 4th and 1 to win that game. Iowa late in the game, we put McGloin in because we just went with the guy at the end of the game that had the hot hand. McGloin comes in, takes us on a drive to put the Iowa game away. The Illinois game, Joe's last game, Matt comes in the last drive and takes us down and wins the game. So we were playing the right cards. We just weren't a very good offensive football team because we just weren't quite there yet. And we knew we could. And I think once everything happened, I think it wouldn't have mattered. I don't think it really would have mattered who played quarterback the rest of that season. The distractions were too heavy. And then, when things changed, I think Rob got out of there. But, from a talent standpoint, he was a year away. I thought he was a year away from really kind of scratching what he could do. And we also felt Matt, when I looked at Matt's high school tape, coming out of high school as a walk-on, I said, this guy can play at this level. We were excited about getting him because we didn't take a scholarship quarterback in that class, and felt like he could really do some really good things. And it turned out to be true. And the thing about Matt, I mean, just the confidence he had, you knew. In fact, Bolden in 2010, we're at Minnesota. Bolden, I think, goes 11 for his first 12, gets a concussion. Matt comes in the game, and I literally said to Bill Kenny, I said, you better get the extra point, the PAT team ready to go. I said, because Matt's throwing us over the top. And Bill goes, you serious? I go, yeah, he is. We play action, pulls off, throws the thing over the top to Moy. Moy scores. And Bill goes, hey, I go, I know the guy I'm coaching is going to throw it deep whenever he can. And he did. So, there are certain regrets you have in coaching that you didn't handle things as well as maybe you could have, or that circumstances happened. Obviously 2011, there's a number of things there that should not have happened the way they happened. So I think some kids got, there's some other players that didn't live up to maybe the potential they had because they transferred to other schools or whatever. So, those are things that it doesn't matter how long you coach and how many wins you have or how many successes you have. It's the ones that you feel like you didn't quite do as well as you could have that'll haunt you the rest of your life. And I feel like, we could have done a better job with both those guys, no doubt. And I'll take, people want to criticize me for that, but, I'm a big boy. I can take it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, dude. That 2012 team, I think it took Penn State probably half a decade, maybe even longer to get, probably even longer than that. Maybe this past year before their offensive line was anywhere close to that 2012 offensive line. I mean, what you guys left as far as offensive line was not replaceable for a very long time with Penn State. So, yeah, and that makes everything a lot easier. Sean, what else you got as far as quarterbacks go?
Yeah. So when you were the quarterbacks coach, you're the passing game coordinator too. I was always curious, Galen Hall was the offensive coordinator. He had the official title at the time. How did the play calling, like who called the plays? Like, I know you were passing game coordinator, he was run game coordinator, but it seemed to be your offense. So who exactly called the plays in that scenario?
Well, I was generally the one communicating what we're going to do, simply because in fact, hold on one sec. I've got one right. I had one right here. So this is actually the wristband that you see these guys wearing. This is the wristband from the last practice Joe had. In fact, my son came to practice that day. He had never been to practice. And after Joe had announced he's going to retire, I said, I said to my wife, I said, let him come to practice a couple of times and just kind of see my dad and I coach together because it's going to end in a couple of weeks. Well, little I know it's going to end that day. So anyway, so the wristband, I was the one that put all the stuff in the wristband. So I knew terminology. I could tell, P16 was play action. It was a 16 boot left, and P was play action series. So I knew all the numbering system, and I work with quarterbacks all the time. So the thing that you lose, and this is not a criticism, but the thing you lose in the no huddle offense is the between play conversations. So for example, when you keep looking over the sideline, you are waiting the last possible second to call the play. And so you call the play and off it goes. Whereas when you're in the huddle, one of the advantages of if it's first and 10 on the 25-yard line going in, when they're in the huddle, you're already talking about, hey, we get to 2nd and 6. What do you want to do here next? So Gail and I were talking about that between every play. What do you like on 2nd and 6? We get a first down, or we get inside the 5. What do you like? So those conversations are already happening. So we already pretty much knew, hey, if this pass is incomplete, we're going to do this. Or Joe would come down. Joe, that was the other wild card. Joe would come down and he'd pull out these yellow strips, graph sheets, because he would take the game plan. We would game plan together, and then he would take the game plan. He'd make notes, and he'd have things he liked, and then he'd have notes as the game goes. I've never been around a guy who saw as much on the field as he did. It's unbelievable. And so we would know between plays what we were thinking next. So that's kind of how it worked. And if it was a pass, generally I'd call it, or sometimes Gail would say, what about this pass? Or I'd say, what about this run? Or, hey, let's run this 3 or 4 times and then set up this pass. So there was a constant conversation going on between each play, and with an idea of, I think one of the things with the no huddle stuff and I think, and that's not Penn State. Penn State's doing more huddle stuff than they've been. They're some of the play action stuff they're doing is really good. But I think some of the teams that are strictly the no huddle, there's not a lot of art in the play calling anymore, because you're not running certain plays to set up play action alpha. They're just up there and it's dartboard stuff and it works, but it's not as much fun to watch. Where you're seeing, when Penn State gets in that T set, like you guys for example, okay, they run the ball a couple times and they shoot a play action off it, and you go, that's great, because everybody chases the play. So they're getting a little bit more of that old school kind of, setup stuff, chess game. But so it was actually pretty easy. It was not as hard as people make it out to be.
Interesting. Because that's
hard sometimes, probably.
It's a lot different than it is nowadays. That's for sure. Look, we got to get to this because you already mentioned Drew, but I think Penn State fans, it's February and everyone's already talking about Drew Aller. And you're right? Bo Prabila just as easily could come in and potentially maybe win that job. From what you have seen in limited action, what do you like? What have you maybe heard behind the scenes? What are your thoughts on him? Did you like the way they handled his first year? You mentioned Morelli. You would have liked to sat him. Can you imagine if you could have played Morelli for four games and still redshirted him? I mean, that'd been cool. But
yeah, totally different world.
Yeah. What do you think of Drew so far?
I think he obviously got a strong arm. I don't know how quick. It's hard for me to really say what I think is going to happen, because I don't go to practice. One of the things as a trustee is I've tried to stay away, because I think, the last thing anybody wants is a guy who used to coach going to practice and saying, hey, when I was here, we used to, And on top of that, I have a show. So technically, I'm part of the evil empire of the media. So, I mean, I can't, I don't go to practice that way either. So I don't think it's appropriate to do that. But, I think, having looked at some of the things he did on his high school film, clearly he's got a skill set. The question is going to be, A, do they have enough people around him because he's not as mobile as what they're used to? Can he get them out of trouble? He doesn't have to run for 20 yards, but can he get out of trouble extensive plays? Didn't have to at some point. And, can he handle the mental part of it? Because the game does get really, really fast. It comes down to this. The guy I used to coach with used to raise beagles to hunt rabbits. And he used to talk about, you get all the genetics that you want in a beagle, and you get the beagle out there, and at some point you got to shoot the gun. And some beagles chase the rabbit when you shoot the gun. Other ones hide behind you and whimper. And the question is, if I had to bet, I don't think he's going to hide behind James Franco's leg and whimper. First of all, because he's too tall to hide behind him. Second of all, he's too big. And I think he's got a lot of potential, but I think it's going to be a matter of, I think managing expectations is going to be one of the things that everyone's got to do. The fan base has already crowned us a national championship football team, the whole 9 yards. The Rose Bowl is exciting. But it reminds me very much of the '93 season. Penn State went 10-2 before there was a New Year's Six. Before they could they go to the Citrus Bowl and they beat number 6 Tennessee by 18. And that team, when they came back, all they talked about was we lost to Ohio State, Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan. They didn't talk about Tennessee, and they made up their mind on January 2nd that they didn't give a dang about anything but win them all. Now, that said, you had a veteran quarterback come back, which is very different. It's not quite analogous. But I think if the focus is right, and if the fans don't talk about what just happened too much, and if they focus on what's going forward, I think they've got a chance to do some things. And I think the biggest thing is going to be, how well they can pass protect up front when it comes to Drew. It looks like they've upgraded the receiving core a little bit. I thought the receiving core was good. At times better than good, but just didn't have that consistent number 2 and 3 guy. You guys talk about the 08. I mean, who you got to cover? I'm going to cover Dion. Okay, well, Derek will kill you, or Jordan Norwood will kill you. In 05, I mean, we had those 3 guys, and then Ethan Kilmer was a walk-on. Butler and Ethan Kilmer, both walk-ons, went to the NFL. So much for the 5-star stuff. I mean, you never know. I mean, and so you got to have those guys to balance off. There were times the wide receiver core was struggling and 8 guys dinged up. Made it easier to take the tight ends out of the game. So I mean, you got to have those things around them. But I'm excited to see what they can do. I'm excited to see who wins the quarterback competition. Because Bo, you watch his high school tape and the way he carries himself, he's not shy. He's not afraid of competition, and he's not going to just hand the job to somebody else.
Sound like a true coach right there, talking about Bo. Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, you know how many other quarterbacks would have switched their commitment after Drew got in the mix, or wouldn't have come?
Absolutely.
Here? I mean, you got to hand it to him. He's not shy, and he didn't hit the transfer portal. And that's not to be critical of Christian Vineyard, who I told people at Pitt, I said, don't underestimate him. That's another kid I think has talent.
Absolutely. Before we get away,
I mean, I'm an old man, I guess.
Yeah. You take that sip of Coca-Cola. You keep promoting. Before we move on from the quarterback, I just real quickly, like elevator style, what do the fans not understand about the quarterback position? Because look, we were like, the whole year was basically us saying Sean Clifford should start. Drew Aller just needs to chill. He'll be there. And we got criticized for it. What do we not get, right? What do we not understand that the coaches do? Because obviously, I mean, we don't know everything, right?
Well, I think we've come to a point now where people are so impatient because of the playoff. And once you lose that second game, it's like, well, screw this year, we're done. I mean, what are we going to do? Instead of, when you have a bunch of seniors that came back on both sides of the ball, your first obligation is to win every game you can. If Sean Clifford gives you the best chance to win, you got to play him. And it panned out that way, pretty much. I mean, I don't think Drew Aller beats Ohio State. I don't think he beats Michigan if he starts. Now, people say, well, you'll help him win next year. sometimes you're not ready. We went to Wisconsin in 04, and we lost Zach Mills and Mike Robinson. Everybody said put Morelli, and I said we put Morelli in this situation tonight. He may never. I mean, it was just a bloodbath. I mean, they just, and even still, we only lost by whatever it was, 7. But you just got to pick your spots. And as Joe always said to us, he said, I'd rather play a kid 2 weeks too late than 1 minute too early. If you play him too early, there's a recovery process. So I think they handled it really, really well. I mean, I think he got his spots. He got some reps. But, I think the things fans don't understand is practice is one thing. Okay, and you can look great in practice. You can look great in 7-on-7, all those things. But when it comes time, you get in that game and you get hit in the mouth and you're sore and you're struggling a little bit. And one of the things I think about the teams that huddle is that's where you find what kind of quarterback you get in. I mean, I can't relay some of the conversations that Mike had in the huddles before 2-minute drills because the language is probably not appropriate for everybody. But, I mean, you can get in that huddle and, we played Northwestern 05 and we had a 4th and 15 and Isaac Smoko came in the huddle and said, we've run this play all week in this situation. I'll catch it. I'll be open. I'll catch it. And Mike picked him, hit it. I mean, so you find those things out, but I think it takes, it's not always as easy as people think it is.
Sean, do you have anything else you want to add before we kind of move to like present day Penn State?
Just kind of a off the wall question a little bit. Who's the best coach you ever coached with besides your dad?
Oh, geez. Well, George Welsh, I coached with at UVA, and he's a Hall of Fame guy, and I think really underrated. And in fact, Joe used to say one of the best judges of talent he was ever around. And there's a guy that UVA found, guys like Herman Moore and Sean Moore and Terry. He found a lot of guys that had and Poindexter, who's at Penn State now. I mean, he found guys like that and recruited them and developed them. I think, if I start naming assistant coaches, I'll probably get in trouble because someone will call me and say, you didn't mention me, you didn't mention this guy. But, I was fortunate a lot of really good coaches. I mean, really good defensive coaches I was around. Larry Johnson certainly is as good as any defensive line coach in terms of techniques and skill sets. Tom Bradley, Ron Vanderlinden did, people forget that I think it was 2012, 3 of the top 4 tacklers in the NFL were Sean Lee, Navarro Bowman, and Paul Posluszny, all of whom Ron had coached. Bill Kenny Bill Kenny, one of the best recruiters, maybe the best recruiter I've been around. Here's a guy that was from South Boston and coaches in North Carolina and South Carolina, Virginia. Are like, well, where in the South is he from? I'm like, he's from South Boston. They're like, really? I'm like, yes. Bill, and really coached a lot of great offensive linemen. I mean, really outstanding. I'm probably forgetting somebody. I know but anyway.
Hey, you said Bradley, so you're okay. At least you won't get yelled at on the show. So then you're
right. You're right.
Yeah, you don't want your co-host coming after you.
No
Sean comes after me enough. Trust me, you don't want that to happen to you. Okay. I want to move on to current tenure, if that's cool with everybody.
Yeah.
Good, because you didn't have a choice. I'm gonna just hit you with the hard question right off the bat here. Grand experiment, kind of what your dad coined to a certain degree. Would your dad be proud of the way Franklin and company are running the Penn State football program today?
I think. I mean, you have to ask him, obviously. But I think, look, at the end of the day, one of the things Joe said was, look, things are going to change. And whoever the next guy is, you have to do things his way. And if the kids go to class and they graduate, and look, he wouldn't. Look, I'll tell you right now, I don't like the touchdown chains and all that crap. But that's that's because we never. One of the things about it is that's a Miami thing, and for people of a certain age, for Penn State to copy Miami for anything, that's like heresy. Like you'd look at that and go, Miami, like. We are better than they are. We in the most important in still what is the most watched college football game of all time. We took that Miami swagger and literally intimidated them. I mean, they can blame Vinny Testaverde all they want, but Michael Irvin was turning down passes. Benny Blades was turning down passes. They just got they got the crap knocked out of them, and they buckled. So I mean, those things, yeah. But look, at the end of the day, if kids are going to class and they're competing at a high level and they're carrying They're representing Penn State with class. That's all you want. And for the most part, you're seeing that with the program right now. Are there certain things that some guys would want to do differently? Yeah. And there's things Joe would do differently. Of course there is. But that's just human nature.
What if you had to right now grade his tenure? What would you give it?
As a trustee, I'm going to respectfully decline that because I don't want to say too high because then he may show up and say, hey, the trustee says I'm an A+. I need more money, and I don't want to grade him low. And people go, oh, you're just saying it. But no, look, at the end of the day, he came in, and there were some difficult circumstances, okay? And, I give Bill O'Brien a lot of credit for what he handled. And I think, when you look at Trace McSorley, for example, was a guy a lot of people didn't think could play college quarterback at this level. They picked him. He picked them. And that guy, I told Trace McSorley, I'll give you the greatest compliment I can ever give you. My dad would have loved to coach you. I mean, what a great human being, great kid. I mean, so you're looking at those kids and you're saying, yeah, they represent what Penn State's all about. No question about it. And I think so, I don't want to get into grading. I didn't like it when people graded us because, again, I can throw a grade at a coach. Or, when you see people on Pro Football Focus say so-and-so never gave up a sack. Well, how do you know? Because maybe the guy that beat the guard was the tackler's responsibility to slide protection. So I don't want to get into grading. But look, I think you look at the success they just had this year. Nobody thought they'd win 10 games or 11 games. And you got to be awfully excited about what they were able to do this year. And of course, typical, I don't want to say Scranton fans because some Scranton fans can be negative on occasion. They'll focus on the 2 losses to Ohio State and Michigan. And I'm sure everybody in that building is thinking about those 2 things. So it's not like they're not. Listen, as bad as some guys from Scranton could be at times, the guys from Philly were worse. I mean, they're just brutal.
You're darn right.
They're just brutal.
You're just trying to save yourself. You're just trying to save yourself now, Jay.
No, I'm just ranking in terms of badness, about fans that are never happy.
Yeah.
I mean, we beat Miami in '86, and people like John Schaefer didn't play a very good game. I'm like, who cares? We won. Like, really? We're going to grade the quarterback after that game? But no, I think if you look at one of the things I think they've done a good job in the last couple of years, with all the talk about you got to go recruit kids in Florida and Texas and California, everything. Saquon Barkley played high school football in Pennsylvania. Miles Sanders played high school football in Pennsylvania. Micah Parsons played high school football in Pennsylvania. You look at, who's the wideout? Jahan Dotson played high school football in Pennsylvania. They're getting the kids that are really carrying the flag for them right now are Pennsylvania kids and really in that Big Ten recruiting footprint. I think one of the things people don't realize, I've had this discussion when people say, well, Ohio State's chasing kids all over. If you look at the core of their team, they're still in a Big Ten footprint with a number of guys, Marvin Harrison Jr., those guys. So I think that, when you look at historically, I think that the encouraging thing is Penn State is really starting to do a good job of that core area that Penn State is always recruited from. And doing a good job of getting the players they need to get. Because at the end of the day, mom and dad can drive up and see you. That matters to people. And that's a very powerful thing. And so I think there's a lot of things that people can be really excited about what's going on.
Sean, do you want to tell Jay your one-liner as far as Jahan Dotson and the best thing since Bethlehem?
Oh, well, it's a Matty Fresh quote. I want to give Matty Fresh all the credit. He's the greatest thing from Nazareth since Jesus. And I think that's the best way to describe him, our friend of the show, Matty Fresh.
No question.
Yeah, and Marquis, and I hear what you're saying, too. Like, we've talked on the podcast before. We talk a lot about recruiting here. Hiring Marquis Hagans and, Stubblefield we parted ways with, that's us trying to lock down the DMV, and that's an area that you guys did a very good job recruiting. Larry Johnson is, revered in the DMV, yep. And to me, like that's the key, and keeping Pennsylvania kids home. And I just think the only knock that I'd have on Franklin right now in the area is we have to recruit Jersey better, and I'd like to see us pick it up there.
Well, I think Michigan's done a good job going there. I think Greg.
Absolutely.
Jim Schiano's going to do a good job finding kids. I mean, like you look at Pacheco from the Chiefs. he was an under the radar guy. I mean, and look how he's playing. And I always thought he was a really good back at Rutgers. I didn't think he was as good as he's going to be with the Chiefs. But I mean, if Greg gets his footing, and they were probably a quarterback away from being a bowl team this year, 7-win team. They just didn't have settled. If they get settled a quarterback, because they were a good defensive football team this year. But they'll make Jersey recruiting a little more difficult. Michigan's done a nice job at going in there. Michigan. I hate to give them credit for anything.
Yeah, I mean, Wisconsin does a good job going in there and getting running backs too, which is just absurd to me. I wanted to ask you, nowadays, a lot of the time, like sometimes Franklin and Dabo Swinney is another guy that comes up a lot, being kind of characterized as a CEO more than an actual football coach. I feel like now more than ever, you kind of have to be a CEO. It's more of an organization than it is a football team. Is it even comparable to how much it was back when Joe was there? How much was Joe really coaching football and doing other things, right? Because I just feel like Franklin goes from recruiting to maybe pitching to the board to talking to Kraft. I mean, how much really was Joe doing those kind of things versus maybe how much Franklin is having to do those things now? Is it even comparable?
Well, I think the biggest problem right now is coaching staffs are too big. There's too many people. And when you have that many people, it becomes unwieldy. And now the coach has got to worry about, I've got a chief of staff. I've got this guy, I've got this guy. I've got 10 assistant coaches. I've got 10 analysts. I've got all these people. And at some point, I had a board member say to me, did you guys work as hard as these guys? I said, are you kidding me? We didn't have 10 analysts and we didn't have you've got a third down analyst. And I'm saying I mean in general in college football. You're paying a guy to tell you what to do on third down. Well, that's the coordinator's job. And that doesn't take that much time. I mean, honestly, like by Sunday night, on using, video, I had watched every third down of the defense we were playing and had an idea as to what their tendencies were, because I would break it down as I went. And I would already have a sense of they're going to blitz a certain percentage of time. Of those blitzes, this percentage of the blitzes are going to bring are hot, and we're going to have to adjust our protection. And I knew that. And so like a card counter during the course of the game, okay, we've had 5 third down and mediums, and they've only blitzed us once, which means they're running behind what their tendency is. They haven't shown us a hot blitz now, so let's be ready. So it becomes a card counting thing. And it becomes something that becomes ingrained because I was producing it by hand. And if you look at us from 05 through really the end, we were generally one of the better third down teams in the Big Ten, and we were generally pretty good in the red zone. So, I mean, those things, I think, when you have so many people, the head coach now is worried about juggling all these people. And I think what's happened now is we've created a situation where, when I say we, let me just make sure I clarify that. I'm talking college football in general, okay, where we've created a situation where, because stats are readily available, because fans can look at it and say, oh, we're 55th in whatever, that's not good enough. That there's this, the coordinators are looking at it, the agents are looking at it, and now the head coach is saying, okay, well, if we're not good enough on offense, I'm just going to can the guy and get somebody else in. And so the head coaches have really kind of let the buck be passed to the coordinators because of the way we've structured things and because of stats, rather than, there were times when Joe would say, look, I don't give a damn what you're ranked in terms of these stats. We want to be good on third downs. We want to be good in red zone. We want to be good in turnovers and time of possession. And if we do that, we're going to win way more games than we ever lose. And I don't care about, how many plays you run or how many yards you get, that kind of stuff. So I think it's a different era in terms of head coaching now not being involved. Whereas, when I coached for George Welsh, if the defensive line coach got sick and went home, George Welsh could go in and coach the defensive line for the day. I don't know that coaches have moved around that much and studied the game as much, because so many guys get funneled right into, I'm an offensive guy strictly. I think one of the things that, I was talking to Pat Kraft just a couple of days ago about Manny Diaz. And he said when he interviewed him for the Temple job, he was a defensive guy, but he got on the board and talked about offense. And he talked about how he always spent his time looking at offensive stuff, which I was the same way. I would spend if I went to a clinic, I went and listened to defensive guys more so than offensive guys. And I think that's, those are the guys that, and I think if Manny were to get a shot to be a head coach again sometime, I think he'll be very successful. And you look at some of the things he's done defensively. So I think CEO is probably not the right word, but with as unwieldy as the staffs have become and as many people as they have around, I think head coaches they have to spend too much time juggling personnel and juggling staff as opposed then to just coaching. So, how much James is involved or Dabo Swinney is involved or Nick Saban's involved in the day-to-day game planning, I don't know. But I think you can be. It's just a matter of what your focus is and what you want to do. And like I said, Joe would be in there, and by Monday night, he had the game plan. He'd come in Tuesday morning and say, this third down, I don't like this. You got too much of this. Why do you like this? And we would go through, we would go point by point. And he'd do the same thing with Tom Bradley. We hated it, but it made us better. You're just like, we spent 2 days working on this, and you come in and you pull 3 or 4 things out that you really love. But that's just the way it is. And I think some of the great guys, there's two different. You can do it either way. And I think Saban's got it one way, and Dabo's got another way. And again, I don't even want to. I hate to characterize anybody without really spending time. I've spent time when Urban was still at Ohio State. I went out and watched them spring practice for a couple of days, and he was one of those guys that he was in everybody's stuff. And I was like, I've seen this movie. Like, Joe would run all over the practice field, and he'd come in the next day and he'd say to Larry, hey, when you guys are doing the defensive line drills, why are you doing this? And Jay, when he threw that pass, why did you tell him you wanted to? And he'd say, Galen, I don't want him to make that cut. And he's pushing that. So, just everybody has their own style. Not that one's better, and it can all be effective. And I think if you look at the NFL, that model is kind of, at one point, Jerry Jones was hiring coordinators before a head coach. I think it was when Garrett got hired. And you start to go, whoa, wait, what? And I think that's filtered down into college a little bit.
What do you think of Patrick Kraft? You mentioned him. Are you allowed to make a comment as a trustee?
Oh, yeah. I think Pat has come in and he's been very aggressive to try and get some things done that need to get done. I've worked with him on the NIL stuff, which will give you a nice segue. And I know you want to talk NIL. He's been instrumental in really trying to help us get that moved along. And I think he understands. I think the one thing he understands is the power of the Penn State brand. I think he understands that this is different. That Penn State is a unique place. That there is something special about when you say Penn State to people. And I think that Neely Bendapudi has been great that way as well. They made it very, very clear early on in her tenure and early on in Pat's tenure that they told us as a board that, we know what Penn State stands for. We're not going to shy away from what has made Penn Staters proud. And the people on the board could not have been more excited to hear that.
That's awesome. Sean, before we hit the name, image, and likeness roller coaster, any final thoughts that you want to cover?
Yeah, Jay. So what's your relationship like with James Franklin and Patrick? I know you mentioned Kraft. You talked to him quite a bit. What's your relationship like with Franklin? Do you have a personal relationship or anything professional?
It's professional, but again,
just professional, like you're on the board.
And also because of the media, being a part of the media. And I did a show before Nittany Game week. And on top of that, I've tried to make it a point to stay away. Not because I don't want to be around it, but they don't need an old coach sticking his nose in. No, seriously. I mean that very sincerely. Like, look, let them do their jobs without somebody acting like they know something. And people are always saying, "What do you think about this?" or "What to do?" And I said, "Look, I'm not a practice." When people ask me, "Should Al be playing more than Clifford?" I go, "Look, they're practice, not me." So you're asking the wrong guy. No, seriously. It sounds like I'm being flippant, but I'm not. But I think it's important for them to feel like they can do whatever they want without somebody second guessing them. And there are trustees that'll get at lunch between meetings. Go, "What do you think?" I go, "Look, I'm not getting into it, guys. So don't ask."
You sound like Nick Saban now. Yeah, don't ask.
But seriously, like, look, I'm an old soul that way. And had my dad not died, I think he probably would have the first fall gone somewhere, gotten out of there and not wanting to be a distraction, not wanting to be, getting asked what what would you do, that kind of thing.
Well, and that's the other thing, Jay, like, not only are you a former coach, not only are you a board member, but your father was the head coach for 40 plus years. Yeah. So you would have that to deal with too. Just like, oh, here come the Paterno. So I totally get that.
Yeah. The reason I was laughing is because we said very similar things about the Clifford Allard thing as far as not being at practice and et cetera, et cetera. So that is very on cue to what we've been saying here. Okay, I want to go to the name, image, and likeness. Obviously, Success with Honor is what you were helping with, the collective there. How's it going? Why did you form it? I guess some people might not. I feel like we talked about this when it first happened last year. Was it last year, Sean? And we started talking about it. But so our listeners should be relatively aware. But maybe a quick elevator pitch for what it is, and I guess how is it currently going?
Well, last year at this time, collectives were forming, and Penn State did not have one. And so I talked to Anthony Lebrano. I also talked to a guy named Ben Boma, who played hockey here at Penn State, who's very well connected with, he's a producer with Fox for NFL. He does NHL games for ESPN and TNT. He does, you name it, he does college football with ABC, very connected. Another guy named Kerry Small. And I said, look, we got to form something. We got to get this going. We got to make sure that we have a vehicle to help all of our 31 sports. At the same time, so we get to a last February board meeting, and it's mentioned that, by Sandy Barber that they're close to announcing a collective. So there were five alums who had put together money for a collective, but they had no way to get the money to players, no back end, no contracts, no bank account even set up. They had no social media, no website for other people. So we got together in a room, and Ira Lubert was one of them, got him Rick Sokoloff, Tony Misitano, Mark Toniati, Bob Poole. So those are the guys. So we all got together, and I said, look, we've got the back end. We've got all the structure that you need. We've got the website. We've got the name. We've got all these things ready to go. You guys have the cash. And because I'm a trustee, I'm not allowed to contribute, which doesn't bother me. Because I got 3 kids in college right now, so I'm running my own NIL. And I'm not getting any return on my investment other than, hey, Dad, thanks. I need more money. So we got together and really put this thing together with the idea that we want to help all 31 sports. We want to impact all 31 sports. Certainly football is going to be that's going to be the elephant in the room. It's going to be 800-pound gorilla. Basketball, and then you start to get into some of the women's sports that are very, very important. So we put that together with the idea that we were not going to get caught up in giving kids tens and tens of thousands of dollars for no show and not doing anything, or just pay to play. And we weren't going to be putting bags of cash in front of people. Now, as I think I mentioned this too before we started, when the California law passed, I had already been consulting with a group that was doing financial literacy education around the country with some really big time schools. And they called and said, would you consult on NIL? So I ended up being one of the first NIL consultants in the country. And we started to look at what's going on. So I'm talking to people around the country all the time. So we had a lot of background in terms of how to put the collective and what need to be done and what we weren't going to do. And we also had a pretty good idea of what's going on in the marketplace, because you hear a lot of stories. You hear, a kid goes to tennis. This kid goes here for $8 million. Then you find out, well, he gets $8 million. He gets $1 million if he wins the Heisman, $1 million if he wins the national championship, $500,000 if he wins the SEC, $500,000 if he does this. And you start to look at it comes down to $70,000 a year. Whereas, everybody's, oh my God, $8 million. So a lot of those things are, we're finding out, what it really comes down to with your collectives is most of them are creating basically kind of a base package for all the players on the team. Like, for example, Success with Honor has signed every scholarship football player right now has signed something with Success with Honor. We've signed athletes from all 31 sports. So when you look at that, everybody, there's kind of a base framework that everybody has. They have to do certain things, and I can't get into the terms of the contracts because those are all on a confidentiality thing. But so everybody's kind of building that structure. Now, outside of that, you have your outliers. You have a Bryce Young. Well, the Alabama package, all their players have a certain package. Bryce Young, because he was a reigning Heisman Trophy winner, gets the Dr. Pepper deal. He gets a Heisman House deal. So he's making millions of dollars because he's got a national brand. Will Anderson made a lot of money. So we did it so that we would have a vehicle to help football and certainly all the other sports. And we're really happy. That makes it one of the things that we're proudest of is that athletes from all 31 sports have benefited from what we're doing. And we want to do it the Penn State way. We want to make sure we comply with all the rules and that it's done in a way that is done with integrity.
There's so many questions that we can go from there. I guess we've heard those nightmare scenarios, and we've heard how there really isn't any regulation or really there isn't really any, I guess, punishment if you don't follow said regulation. And I guess my question really is, are you guys just doing it the right way because that you just think that's the right way to do it? And then on top of that, I know you can't give us maybe specific numbers, but for the average Joe, are we seeing, I guess, success with those people? Because I'm just thinking, if I give you guys my $5, okay, yeah, like, the Drew Allers, the Nick Singletons, we know those guys are going to be fine. But how successful has it been for those lower guys, as much as you can tell us, I guess? That's what I'm curious in, too.
Well, I think the reality is they're all, when you start to look at what the NCAA has done they lost the Alston case where you can give kids, and so guys are getting $6,000 for that or $7,000, whatever it is. They're getting cost of attendance. Sometimes it's 10, 11 grand. If a guy gets $25,000 in NIL money, and you start to look at it, you go, okay, here's a kid in college whose meals are paid for, his rent is paid for, tuition's paid for, books are paid for, and they've got 45 or 47 or 50 grand in cash. I mean, that's a pretty good deal. I mean,
it's a long way away from like the horror stories we used to hear when certain guys couldn't buy a winter jacket because they literally didn't have any, and they weren't even allowed to go get a job.
No doubt. And I think, look, you guys certainly know I'm not a fan of the NCAA, but I mean, to give them credit, they moved a lot. They made a lot of movement in terms of what they allowed people to do, in terms of, there was a clothing fund for kids, so a kid would come here from Florida, we could go get them a winter coat. They just come in and say, I need a winter coat, need this. And so you could do those things for them. So they did move. I think the biggest thing is when California passed the law and the Supreme Court was dealing with the Alston case, I think my biggest complaint, or if I was going to criticize the college game now, certainly the NCAA has abdicated any type of leadership on any of this. One of the things people have asked me is, what would your dad have done? I said, I'll tell you what my dad would be doing. It's not what he'd be doing now. It's what he would have done the minute California passed the law. He would have gone to an NCAA convention. He would have gone to university presidents and said, let's get in a room and let's figure out where this plane is going to land. And it's probably revenue sharing. And he would say, look, the money we're making and on TV, we have to pay these guys. He would have said, yeah, it's time. When you talk about a $7 billion TV deal over 7 years, the kids all see that. They go, okay, you're making, and really COVID changed the whole game because all those players said, I got to live in a bubble. I got to do this. Why? Because you need the TV contract money. Well, if we walk out of here, look, as much as, I don't know how good a cornhole player James Franklin and Ryan Day are. They may be great. They may be the best guys on the planet. I don't know. But I can pretty much guarantee you that if next year out in Columbus, both teams walk off the field, Gus Johnson's not going to stay there to broadcast a cornhole game between the Ohio State staff and Penn State staff. And I'm pretty sure that 100,000 people aren't going to pay to see that. And the players know that. So we're at a point now where somebody in the NCAA should take control. And I feel like we have not seen that from college coaches that have said, look, you know what? I can get by on $4 million a year. I got to go from $9 million a year or $7 million a year or $6 million a year. I can get by on $3 million a year. And we got to start, and my coordinator can get by on $500,000 instead of 1.2. And my defense, That's where it's going to come from. It's going to come from the salaries. I mean, and again, if you have a head coach that makes, and again, don't read too much into this. I'm just using numbers. When you have a head football coach like Nick Saban making $9 million a year, it might be more, might be less, but it's in that ballpark. The total amount of money spent on the scholarships for Alabama's football team is probably neighborhood about 4.2. So you have one guy making 9, teams making 4.2. So that number is going to flip when revenue sharing comes, and that's where that's where this is going to have to land. But where we've had great success with honor is a guy like Roman Bravo Young with a wrestling team. He's probably on, I don't know if he's on a quarter scholarship, whatever, but you get 9.9 scholarships for wrestlers. There's 30 wrestlers on the team. And why 9.9 scholarships and not 10? Because it's the NCAA. 10 would just be too easy. But to come back as an out-of-state kid, if he's on a quarter scholarship, that's $38,000-$39,000 mom and dad got to come up with. Because of the NIL deal, he's able to come back and win another. I don't want to put too much pressure, but he's going to win another national championship. There's no question about it. Unless God himself comes down and wrestles him, I think he's winning another one. So he's got a pizza deal downtown. He's doing Dean's Chicken. He's doing a bunch of stuff. So to me, those are the things that are really good. And if we're able to help a kid come back who maybe he's a 3rd-round pick in the NFL and play himself into a 2nd-round pick or 1st-round pick, that's a plus. There may be walk-ons that are able to get some money to do things. So those are the things that make you feel good about it, is that you're able to help kids further their education, get a better experience, whether it's, we had a women's volleyball player last year that could come back for her senior year and became a really significant contributor, and she could not be more grateful. But that's the fun of it, and being able to do that.
Yeah, Dom DeLuca comes to mind.
We all hate NIL. I mean, look, as a trustee, I'd rather see revenue sharing. I'd rather say, okay, everybody gets, it's out there, everybody knows, we know, and it's standardized nationally, because I think that's what's going to land anyway. I think, the Johnson case that's going through the courts now, the NCAA is going to lose that in the Supreme Court. I'll be shocked if they don't, and then it's all over. Then you're going to have to figure out what they are. And as far as I'm concerned, in the congressional level, I don't want them legislating NIL. I want them to literally just pass a law that defines legally what the student-athlete relationship is with the university, and then everything has to build off that. Yeah, I've spent way too much time thinking about this, as you can tell.
No, we appreciate it.
But as a trustee, we have to anticipate these things. When you start thinking about, whether it's coaching contracts, whatever, in the back of your mind, you got to be ready to, when revenue sharing comes, you're going to have some hard conversations with coaches and personnel in your athletic department, and you're going to have to find that money somewhere. It won't be catastrophic because the TV rights are about to jump, but that's the advantageous time. Like right now, if you took the current TV deal that we just had last year, Big Ten money, and you took 30% of that revenue and split it evenly among all 800 athletes at Penn State, you're looking, they'd all get about $25,000. And most of them would take that deal.
Yeah, of course. And we appreciate you, really elaborating on it, because there's the NIL world is just so confusing right now. And like from the coaches themselves, and I don't want to say every coach, but like Jim Boeheim comes to mind. They just sound like angry old men, a lot of them, and nobody's interested in solving the problem. There's just a lot of finger pointing. And like you said, like what Joe would do, and I totally agree with you. I think Joe would be saying, let's try to figure this out and try to see where this all comes out. And I just don't feel like there's enough of that. And I don't know if it should come from Congress, or if it should come. I think the NCAA is pretty much impotent at this point. I mean, what about one of the ideas that I've heard Kirk Herbstreit talk a lot about is having a commissioner of college football. Like, what would you think of that?
Well, the conferences aren't going to give that power up. That's the biggest problem.
That is the problem.
In college football, the NCAA really does not run the show. I think one of the things that's hurting the game right now is the greed of two conferences, the SEC and the Big Ten. And we can make all this money, and everybody thinks the more money you spend, the better you're going to be. That's really not it. I mean, that's not what it comes down to. It's not how much money you spend. Because if you look at it, Penn State has been in the top 5 nationally in terms of football budget, recruiting budget, and coaches' salaries. We've been in the top 5 nationally. Now that doesn't mean, and we're right there right now. So that's not to be critical, but I mean that's not the magic pill. If I suddenly give a coach $300,000 more in his contract, that doesn't make him a better coach. It just means I'm paying more to have him do what he does. But everybody thinks that if we just spend more money and spend more money in facilities, in terms of, I'm talking Big Ten and SEC, we'll just outspend everybody. We'll just and the selfishness, and what I mean by that is the selfishness of that. If you go back to the early 80s, when the television contract, the NCAA's monopoly of the television contracts was blown up by the Supreme Court, a number of schools created, a number of conferences and independent schools created what they called the College Football Association. So instead of the SEC having a deal and this conference having a deal, they all got together and said, let's put this together. Let's distribute the money evenly. And now, and so everybody benefits from it. If all these conferences got together and did that, USC and UCLA could stay where they belong. I mean, I don't care what anybody says. They're not that, I mean, it's going to be exciting. Yeah, it's going to be great to have them in the league. But at the end of the day, when our baseball team's got to go out there, and when USC's baseball team's got to go to West Lafayette one weekend and Bloomington another weekend, not that those aren't lovely places, but when they're used to going to Tempe and playing in 75-degree weather. So, I mean, if they had a commissioner, if they forced these conferences to literally say the health of this game is going to be bolstered by the fact that teams stay where they belong geographically, play geographic rivals, the game is going to be better. Till that happens, we're going to have some problems.
I'm going to push back a little bit on the, I guess I think there's a threshold, right? I think there's a certain amount of money you have to spend in order to be successful in college football specifically. You look at recruiting budgets, for example, nobody spends more money in recruiting than Georgia does. Obviously, you can point that finger right back at me and look at what Texas A&M failed to do last year. But I think you got to spend there's a certain threshold, right? You got to be Georgia. I always loved using Georgia.
Doubt. I don't mean you go out and don't spend anything, but I think once you get to a certain level,
other things become a factor.
Everybody's got, I mean, when you get to the level that we're at, everybody's got good facilities. Everybody does. So it doesn't, whether you have the waterfall or not, isn't the deal breaker. And I don't think we have a waterfall. But I mean, and so I mean, everybody looks at, well, Oregon spent all this money in facilities. Well, they've got a guy that can write a check for whatever they want. But even he is, having known Phil Knight a long time, even he's like, well, you got to justify why this is important. Does this improve whatever? But, I was in Ohio State's facility in Urban's last year there. Penn State, what Penn State had in 2011 was better than what Ohio State had then in 2017-18. And that's absolute fact. And Urban said the same thing to me. He goes, yeah, what you guys had when I was in there in 2011 was better than what we have now. And I was just in it last year because my daughter was playing lacrosse out there and I saw Larry Johnson walk through. They're going to upgrade some things because they feel like they need to upgrade some things. But everybody's got facilities at a certain level. There's no question about that. So you got to have certain things, and you got to spend a certain amount of money. But like spending an extra $100,000 on recruiting is really not going to make the difference. It still comes down to who's in the building. It still comes down to once you get to a certain level, your differential has got to be not we have a better barbershop or a better golf simulator. It's got to be, or not that, we spent an extra $30 on your Sunday brunch on your visit. It's got to be why Penn State. For example, years ago when we were putting things in the lobby of Lash, there were guys that said we should put Capoletti's Heisman in the front hall. Right when you walk in, and Guido D'Elia said to us, he said, well, great, they'll walk into Ohio State till 6-7. So we're not going to compete on Heisman trophies because that's not what we do. So what we emphasized is best fan support in the country, because at that time every year we were 3 or 4 of the top 5 Big Ten broadcasts. We were in 3 or 4 of them. the experience on the field in terms of the academic performance, bowl performance, all those things, we had a major differential. We had the most guys in the NFL at that time. So we had those differentials and put those all in and said, this is the total package at Penn State that makes us different and makes us better than Ohio State and Michigan. And quite frankly, we're Penn State. So, I mean, we're obviously automatically better than those schools. I'll probably get in trouble for saying that. But, you know, what's your differential? If you're always trying to do what everybody else does, then you have no differential. So I think that's the thing that you got to find at Penn State. I think they're doing that now. It seems like that when you hear guys talking about coming to Penn State and the reasons they're coming to Penn State, you're hearing those kind of themes come through, and I think that's good because that's how you have to do it. So I think you've got to spend X amount of dollars, but the reality is right now is when you look at financially. Alabama, Michigan, Ohio State, Texas, in terms of numbers they bring in, Georgia to an extent, they're Yankees, Red Sox, Dodgers. Okay. Based on our market and our fan base, we're not a corporate fan base. So we are going to be Phillies, Nationals. We're in that thing where we got to be a little bit smarter, be a little bit more clever, because we're not going to go out and get $5 million for a skybox, for a suite at a game. We're not going to get it. Because the people that can spend $5 million on a suite in our state are going to get a suite at an Eagles game or a Steelers game to entertain their corporate clients. Whereas the suite in Alabama, that football suite is the most valuable piece of sports real estate in that state, maybe in the South. So there's a premium there that they can get. So we're a little different. We make plenty of money. But we have 31 sports too that all want to compete. So we have to be cognizant of what our strengths are and what are things we have to work with and be smarter. So there's no question. You're right. We got to spend money, and we are spending money. To be fair to Sandy Barbara, and I know there are people that don't think she was, but you know we were top 5 in all those categories in terms of spending. So you know. That's something that a lot of people don't know. And then when you look at with Pat Kraft is certainly not shied away from being aggressive in what we need to do. We just have to make sure at the board level that we can afford what we want to spend and not bankrupt the athletic department.
Yeah, I mean, so I bring up Georgia because I think Georgia is such a good example of a program for whatever reason, push that button, right? I mean, it wasn't too long ago where Penn State and Georgia were both in a tax slayer bowl. They actually didn't, I don't even think they knew who their new head coach was going to be at that point. And they decided as an athletic department to push the button to full send it into, hey, we want to win not just SEC championships, but we want to win national championships. And I think to a certain degree, Penn State's there, but we hear all the time about alignment and how you need to be aligned from the player to the coaches, to the athletic director, to the president, to, the board of trustees. Do you think Penn State is aligned in a way enough to get to that next level? And was that maybe an issue to begin with?
No, I think that was overblown. I mean, there was very few times that what was requested wasn't granted. Very few times. Even with the last building, I voted against it because of where we were at the time with COVID. We're going to get, to me, there was an argument to be made that if we have a need for office space first, let's do the office space first and then the weight room, because the weight room they had was still 12,000 square feet and better than most weight rooms. They had a better, the Penn State's weight room was better than Ohio State's. And we were losing recruits to Ohio State, and it wasn't because of the weight room. But at the end of the day, what you got to look at is what can you afford? And there was really no philanthropy for that. And there was no plan to get any philanthropy. So that's one of the reasons I voted against it at the time, because we were furloughing employees. We're just coming off the COVID year. And I said, if we can just postpone it. But, it's done. Nothing you can do about it. It wasn't denied. I mean, they got the weight room built. Looks nice, the whole 9 yards. But, this season, they lifted in Haluba Hole a whole year. So it really wasn't the weight room. You know what I mean? And that's, but it is what it is. So, that was the reason that I voted that way, was just because of where we were at the time fiscally. And So that we're going to carry that debt for 30 years on a bond, which is another thing. You're going to renovate that weight room 2 or 3 times before that bond's even paid off. To me, I would have rather see us raise $10 million or $20 million, finance it over 10 years. But again, that wasn't one of the options we were presented with. So, but there's no question. But one of the things Georgia has done, if you look at what they've done to help pay for those facilities that they've done, is when they played Notre Dame in 2019, so it was pre-COVID, the face value of those tickets was $300. So $250 to $300. So there was a $20 million payday right there. In 2019, our entire revenue in Beaver Stadium was about $48 million for the year. So if you want to get those facilities, you're going to have to start to schedule some of those games, because the one thing people don't realize is non-conference games, Penn State owns. So that does not come into revenue sharing with the Big Ten. So if you play Alabama at home and you get $300 per ticket, that's $30 million, and we get it. We don't have to say, okay, we got to cut the top 20 million and split it with all the other teams. So those are the kind of things we're going to have to start thinking about as a differential to start to pay for some things we want to do. And that, I know there does, if you look at our non-conference schedule going forward, you don't see a game like that going forward, where you look at Georgia, there are years they're playing Ohio State and Texas, and obviously that's going to change because Texas is now in the SEC. But, I mean, there are some years where they're playing I think one year they play Ohio State, Florida State, and Georgia Tech in the same year, non-conference. And for that reason, I'd also like to see the Big Ten go back to 8 conference games. But by adding 2 more teams, that's not going to happen. Because, if you went to 8 conference games, you could play Pitt every year. And I know some people don't like that, but you could also play another team every year. You could play a Pitt and a Texas, or a Pitt and a Notre Dame, or something like that, which would be a lot more interesting than where we're at now in terms of non-conference stuff.
The Scranton people would love if Penn State played Notre Dame every year, right?
I know.
Love it.
There's only 2 schools up there.
You answered that. I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you about the vote, and I actually literally had a sub question to that about it being more about the economic uncertainty, because I did read your reasoning for your essay as far as why you went about it. So I'm glad you clarified it.
The other thing I said internally to people at that time, I said, guys, the other thing about it is, in 8 months, your weight room's not going to matter. They go, what do you mean? I go, NIL. I said, and you could have a Nautilus gym in a garage, and if you could put NIL money in kids' pockets, and there were people on the board that said, oh, NIL is never going to happen. I said, guys, you better wake up. It's coming. And now you are seeing much more of, we need NIL money. We need NIL money. You're not hearing coaches talk about facilities nearly as much as they're talking about NIL money. And it's like one of those things that, I go to the board, I go, I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so. Because, when we didn't have a collective 12 months ago, and they're like running around going, oh my God, we need a collective. I said, yeah, I told you this was coming. And I hate to say I told you so, but this was definitely an I told you so. And that was another part of my concern, was what is going to happen as we look at NIL, because it's going to, I don't care what anybody says, it's going to impact your philanthropy. If Joe Smith has $1 million to give to athletics, and he gives $500,000 to NIL, that's $500,000 you're not getting for a weight room or for endowed scholarship, whatever. It just doesn't create more money.
Yeah. Sean, I know you got some things itching on the top of your mind. What you got?
Well, I just wanted to. So, if the vote came up now for the Lash expansion, would you vote for it?
I think the big question would be, what's the financing? That would be my biggest question.
If it was the same financing, like I know you said about the bond.
Probably not still, because again, a 30-year bond, that would be like getting a 30-year loan on a car. You just don't do it, because you're going to get a new one. You're going to want a new one 15 years from now. So, 10 years from now, when we need a new weight room, we're going to still be paying the other one off for 20 more years. I would like to see just find a different way to finance it. But, it was one of those things that there was a rush, and it was kind of put that way. But at the end of the day, it's done. It's there. So I'm not gonna worry about it. But we're gonna have to pay it off for 30 years. And one of the things that I am concerned about is, if we keep borrowing to create facilities, I don't want that to then become a burden for the fans that have all of a sudden now we got to jack ticket prices to fans that have, for a lot of our fans, I mean, this is their disposable income. And they've been coming here for 25 and 30 years. And, you know, in 2012, they were still there. In 2015, they were still there. They came back in 2021 after a COVID year. So, I mean, we got to remember there's a reason we have 107,000 seats. And we got, you know, so I don't want to ever get to the point where we're spending so much that we start to price those people out of the market. Because I think that would be unfortunate, because that's the backbone of this program. That's the backbone of this program.
Yeah,
but it's done. So I mean, you know, at the end of the day, if they feel like they can handle that debt load, then we got to handle it.
That's a good.
Just so you know, I voted against the $84 million art museum too. So it's not. I mean, this is not a football specific. You know, people try to make it that way. Not at all. This was a, you know, we were in COVID, and let's get out of COVID and get a feel for what the market. And I also at that time said I'm concerned about what might happen with revenue sharing with athletes. I mean, there's still so much uncertainty in the college marketplace right now that's another reason I would still be a little hesitant to just go ahead and rubber stamp something.
Can you give us a sneak peek or any
By
sort?
the way, I did vote for the practice field things because there was a financing plan in place.
Right, that's the different
with the endowment, so it was a different situation that way.
Right, yeah, and that seemed to be way more. I don't want to. For lack of a better word, thought out a little bit better as far as how it was going to be paid for. Can you give us a sneak peek into maybe when I talked about the alignment, is there any sort of maybe momentum as far as fundraising goes that maybe wasn't there a couple of years ago? It feels that way, at least from a fan perspective. But can you, I guess, from what you have heard and what you've seen, is that momentum really there, or is that maybe?
We're not seeing it yet, but I think, you know, it's just going to take some time for Pat's team to get in place and start to get their feet on the ground and get to know who's who. There were, you know, just this past weekend, there were a number of hockey guys in who have done very, very well. And I know some of them and got them around some people, introduced them to some Penn State people. This past fall, my mom had a dinner at her house the night before the Ohio State game and had there were some donors that came back to that had not been back to Penn State in 11 years. So we've done some things on that end to try and help Neely, and not just athletics, just across the board. And one of the people that came back might be able to do something as it relates to women's soccer stadium. You know, just but a lot of them might be, there are library donors there. There were donors to liberal arts there. So, you know, with Neely involved and with Pat involved, there's definitely more of an embracing of the history of Penn State and trying to tap into people that know people and resources. Whereas, you know, for 10, 11 years, there was definitely a sense of, you know, a stiff arm as it related to certainly me and to certainly Sue and some other people, where that's gone. And I think that's a good thing, because, you know, my mom's never wavered. You know, even, you know, less than 2 months after my dad was fired, they still went through with made good on $150,000 donation pledge that they had made before. And I'm like, Mom, you are a better person than I am. I mean, like, you know, I mean, that's you know, the two of them, my mom and dad. I know we gave them our word. We're going to do it, and Penn State's got to thrive. So, you know, it's unfortunate that there was some of that was lost for a while, but it's back. And I think you're going to see a lot of momentum because a lot of people feel very, very, a lot of excitement about the president and the AD, as well as where the football program is going. I think that's very real. But it'd
be interesting to see where it's at a year from now.
Yeah, it's just going to take. It takes time. You know, one of the things people don't realize is you don't just walk into somebody's house and say, "Hand money over." I mean, you know, the endowment, that the head coaching endowment. I'll give you an example. The head coaching endowment the money's going to end up paying for the practice field improvements. The guy that put that money together was a guy named Pat Malloy. He was at my parents' house probably 8-9 times. The first time he came, this guy, he'd done very, very well in real estate, worth a lot of money, obviously. And he came and he brought his own bottle to drink. And I was like, "What are you drinking?" And it was called 10 High or something. So the next time he came, my mom had a note that Pat Malloy drinks 10 high and blah, blah, blah. So my mom goes to the liquor store thinking it's going to be like $200 a bottle. So, I mean, all the dinners that my mom used to have did not give Penn State a bill, did all the work. I mean, never said, hey, you got to pay me, did it all volunteer, all the stuff. So she goes to the state store and she goes, you guys have this knee high or 10 high, whatever it is. And the guy's like, yeah. And she's like, how much is it? And he's like, $2.50. She's like, oh my God. He's like, no, $2.50. There was some really cheap crap, but this guy had always had it. So he comes in for the next dinner. My mom puts the bottle down on the seat, goes like, don't worry, I got you covered. And it's little things like that. So ultimately, over time, they felt comfortable asking, and Pat gave the commitment. And that's how you got to get done. It's going to take some time.
That's an awesome story. What you got, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's awesome. And I did see, like, your mom was in the president's box this past year at one of the football games. So I think that's absolutely necessary. If you want to get these, and Corey and I talked about it when Sandy announced that she was retiring, that she did some good things, but clearly the one thing against her was donations. I mean, the stadium plan that came about 6 years ago didn't go anywhere. I mean, that comes to mind. Yeah, and I just want to get back to, the Board of Trustees. So one of the things that, and I hear what you're saying, about budget, about recruiting budget and everything, and how we're, we spend a lot of money on it. What about things like player dorms? Because I don't know if you lived in Beaver Hall or anything. I did. Yeah. And Saquon Barkley actually lived a floor up from me my junior year, his freshman year. And I mean, you got guys that are 320 pounds and two of them sometimes living in the same room, and the rooms are like this.
Yep.
I mean, do you think maybe player dorms could be something that you guys vote on down the line?
Well, as a freshman, you need to be in the dorms. I mean, it was good enough for Franco Harris. It was good enough for Michael Robinson. It was good enough for some of the great guys that ever played the game. And I think you need, as a freshman, to be around other students. I think that's part of the experience. Now, when you start talking about renovating dorms, I know that's one of the things that comes up. The reality is athletics has no control over dorms. That housing and food services is a entity into and of itself. It supports itself. So we can't just go and say, hey, you got to renovate these dorms because football players need dorms. So that's number one. Number two, one of the things that has been requested is their own bathrooms. They want their own bathrooms. Well, if you go to Eastview Terrace, which is I don't know where Eastview Terrace, if you know where it is, it's very close to Lash. Every one of them has their own bathroom, and those are relatively new. So, I mean, we have options on campus to meet what guys want. Nittany apartments are due, but, there's a list of, we're in the middle of spending a lot of money on East Halls right now to get them renovated. We've got to get into Pollock, which is where a lot of football players live in Pollock. So that's coming. So, I mean, we're getting there, but you got to remember, we have 49,000 students that pay to be here. And we, at the end of the day, we have an obligation to make sure their dorms are good as well. But I mean, those things will come over time. But, unfortunately, the generation of coaches, and again, this is not to single any one coach out, but the generation of coaches that are there now, the agents are running the show, and the agents are saying, well, I want more money, and I want this, that, and the other thing, and I want it done yesterday. And the agents don't understand that when you come to a university, Penn State's an $8 billion operation. And when you look at athletics, we're $190 million. So it's really a very small part of what we do in terms of on the fiscal side. So we can't prioritize dorms for one 85-person group or 120-person group over the other 48,000. We'd all love to. You'd love to wave a magic wand and say, hey, we're just going to build this. But, that's not how universities work. I mean, just for example, if you look at what we're going to spend on athletic facilities in the next 5 to 7 years, between the stadium and everything, you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars for an operation that brings you in, when we peak, will probably $210 million a year. When you look at for example, on the research side, and I know I'm probably getting into things you're like, oh, shit. If you look at research, our research facility is looking for $140, $150 million in spending in the next 4 or 5 years. Research brings in $1 to $1.1 billion a year. So we've got to make sure we're not shortchanging money over there, because that's a much more lucrative and much more income on that. And obviously research on things like pediatric cancer and things like from all that to defense research that we do. Certainly that's more important than whether we win a football game or not. I mean, not to belittle it, but I mean, at the end of the day, if we cure pediatric cancer, I think that's a pretty big deal. Whether we, win by 7 or 20, not quite as important. But again, it's all part of it. And we as trustees, it would be, we'd love to just focus on one thing. It'd be easy to just handle athletics. But when we have so many competing interests for, and quite frankly, Neely came in and really got into a situation where they started looking at some things, running some deficits that were not reported to us, and that they found. So there's been some, not athletics, but in general, the whole university. So there's been some challenges there. So we're going to have to get some things done first. And she's, to her credit, she's taken things on. She's taken the bull by the horns, and we've gone after some things. And I think we may be a little slow getting some things done in the short term, but long term, Penn State's going to be a much better place. And we'll get to some of the things that we need.
That's exciting.
It's going to take some time.
Speaking of those things that need to get done, got to ask you, this week they talked about Beaver Stadium and most likely being a renovation. Can you give us any sort of, I don't know, what whisperings of what you've heard, what might be coming down the pipeline? Are we going to be peeing in troughs come 2030?
I hope.
Yeah,
I think that's part of the charm of it. No. I think this. Obviously that's been a subject conversation for a lot of people. And there were people that felt we should have a new stadium. There are people felt like we should renovate. There are people, and I said, and my take on this would be this. I'm a Red Sox fan. Okay. They built a new Yankee Stadium. Yankee fans that I know hate it because it's not the same home plate that Joe DiMaggio and Reggie Jackson and I can go on and on. It's not the same home plate they stood and hit from. And that, to me, even as a Red Sox fan, I was offended by that. Like, what are you doing? For the amount of money you're spending, renovate the most iconic baseball stadium on the planet. Like, what? Who? And to the Red Sox credit, they have kept the footprint of Fenway as it is, the charm of Fenway, and they built monster seats. They did all kinds of things. They did things around the stadium to enhance revenue, and they won that battle. They have the better stadium. It's not even close because of the history there. Ted Williams stood at that home plate.
Suck it, Sean.
What? Oh, he'll admit
yes.
it. He will admit
it. No, I do. I am the resident Yankee fan here, and I agree with what you said. Like, Yankee State, the new Yankees. Yeah, I mean, you don't
take Beaver Stadium and tear it down and build a new one down below the baseball stadium. I mean, one of the best things about a stadium is no matter where you drive in from, you see it on the hill.
Yeah, and just think about it in terms of college teams, Jay. Like, Ohio State's not going to knock the Horseshoe down.
No.
Michigan, You're not going to knock down Michigan Stadium. Notre Dame's not going to knock down their stadium. So why are we going to knock down our stadium? It just it doesn't make any sense to me.
And the reality,
now, there are renovations definitely needed, but I think you renovate rather than.
But the thing you got to realize is this: number one, the kind of money you're talking about for a new stadium, you're talking north of $1 billion. You can't pay for it. If you look at what Cal did with their renovation, that bond, people don't realize this, that bond gets paid up in 2112. Yes, 2112. Like a male child born now that lives to 76 life expectancy will not be alive to see that last bond payment paid out. And their academic side had to take some of that debt on. And we can't do that. We're not going to do that. So we have to then find what's the sweet spot into what we can pay without pricing our fans out of the market. Because again, the loyalty of our fans is what has carried this program through year after year after year. We can't suddenly say we're going to drop $800 million and go to 80,000. I think one of the things that I think most trustees find non-negotiable is reducing the size. because we're selling it. Yeah, is the stadium full every week? No, but we're selling those tickets. And do you really want to go tell 20,000 of your fans, hey, look, we appreciate the fact you've been with us, but unless you're willing to triple what you pay, you know what? You'll lose them as fans forever. They'll just look at you and say, you know what? Screw you. I'll go vote. I'll go root for somebody else because you don't respect what my family has done, you know, as season ticket holders for 40 years in section NJ, row 32.
You think that's a common theme across most of the trustees feel that way?
Yes. I think most of them get it. I think certainly you can come in and dazzle people with numbers and this kind of stuff, but I think at the end of the day, they all feel, you know, most of our trustees are season tickets, some holders, and I think they all know people. You know, when they go home, we all hear about it. We hear about, hey, you better not do this. You better not move me. You know, we went through the STEP program in 2011, and people moved, and that was tough. And we're now at the point where some of those people that stuck with us, they've been in those seats for 11 years, and we come back and say, we're going to move you again unless you. Again, I don't want. I'm not speaking for the university. I'm just speaking as a guy who's been around been around Penn State and understands our fan base. But I think the renovation call was the right one, without a doubt. What that'll look like, we'll see, and then how much we can spend, we got to figure out the numbers, because that's gonna be. We have to do something we can afford, because we can't saddle the university with it.
Is there anything? Well, I have two questions. Is there anything you can tell us? I think Sean's just plugging in his computer. Is there anything you can tell us that is high on the list? And then also, maybe the stages are like, are we looking at like, hey, we'll try to do maybe a quarter or a half of it one off season, and then although there's no off season here at Hardcore Penn State Football. Yeah. Are you going to try to do it in quarters? I mean, are we looking at like, hey, by 2040, it's going to be completely renovated? Like, is there any of those conversations? Have those already happened, or is those conversations still need to be happening?
They have not all of them have happened with Pat. I think there's been a number of studies done, but I think Pat's got to get comfortable with what he thinks is important. Neely's got to get comfortable with what they think is important. So, you know, there isn't other than we're going to renovate, there's not really anything beyond that. I think there are next stages, but I do know this. I mean, they do want to put the foot on the gas. We don't want to be sitting here talking about renovations in 2030. And what's unfortunate is this: when we did the renovations in 2001, that bond was paid off in 10 years. Because the model was such that revenue would go to paying off the bond in 10 years. So, you know, people think we should tear down the suites on the east side. East side, new ones. I mean, to tear those down makes no sense because they're paid for. It's found money now. I mean, every dollar that comes in is going right back into the program because they were paid off 10 years ago. Had this what happened in 2011 not happened, we would have done the renovations in 2013, 2014. We'd be done. We'd have been done 7-8 years ago. But once that happened, all of a sudden there was a $60 million fine, all those things that we all know were total, you know, don't get me started on that. But I mean, that certainly set the clock back for what we could do and the timing of it. This should have been done 7-8 years ago, but some people didn't handle some things the right way, and we put ourselves in a situation we couldn't do it.
Is there a urgency that needs to happen as far as like you hear things that happen at like Hawaii where like they couldn't even play in their stadium anymore? Is there any pending doom as far as, hey, this deal, like we can't? Okay.
No, that's been overblown. That there have been structural studies done on it. And you're not have to worry about. And I know there are people that want to say, well, is it winterized? So if we have a playoff game in 2 years at home, all you got to do is keep the water running. It's that easy. That you talk about making a mountain out of a molehill, because there was it's not winterized. Well, you guys talk about that 2008 Michigan State game. It was in the teens. You can't tell me you can't play in there when it's cold. But, when you look at the playoffs, it's going to be interesting because the 2 weeks after the Big Ten is when you would play a home game. That's a graduation weekend. So you're going to rub up against, do you play that game Thursday night? Do you play it Saturday? Whatever it is. And I think for the fans, for example, this year, this year, if Penn State was the 11-12 seed, they would have gone to Ohio State. Okay, if we lost to Ohio State, it's over. Season's over. There's no Rose Bowl. So, I mean, that's going to be one of the things I think fans are going to have to adjust, because that first game might be in Columbus. It might be in Stillwater, Oklahoma. It might be in, Eugene, Oregon, or it might be in State College. But if you lose that first round game, there's no Rose Bowl, there's no Peach Bowl, there's no Citrus Bowl, there's nothing. And I'm not sure fans will like that. I think there'll be, and I think 12 is too many. I think 6 is probably, when you look at the outcome of the games, there's not 12 teams that can win it. There just aren't. There's rarely 4 teams that can win it, as we kind of saw this year. And if Ohio State if that shot on Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't happen, I think Ohio State's probably your national champion. As much as I hate to see a Philly kid playing out there.
I'm with you.
He is unbelievable. He's one of the best I've seen the last 10, 15 years.
Do you have a quick comparison of him to a player maybe you've coached or someone maybe that he reminds you of?
It'd be hard because his size, just the sheer size of him, and the way the ball skills he has are just. I mean, I'd have to think about it. I mean, like Jared Vicious had that size, not quite that speed. Bobby Ingram had those hands. Bobby just had. Bobby. No, I think one game Bobby dropped 2 or 3 passes, and that was about it. And the rest. But I mean, it's hard to say, who he most liked.
I was thinking kind of he reminds me of the way the nonchalant ability to catch the ball of Norwood, but he has the size that reminds me of Robinson.
Yeah. I've forgotten about him, as in terms of size. And then, a guy I coached at UVA, Herman Moore, had that same kind of reach, but was not as big and physical as Harrison is. I mean, he's just as good as Joey Porter Jr. was, they had to put a safety over top of Harrison, and that changed the game. I mean, that suddenly opened up the run game and some other things. But, when you have that guy that is that good, in Ohio State, they've always had, they've had that guy, but they've always had 2 or 3 other guys. So when you spend time with him, they start to hit you with the other guys. And I think that's, that goes back to what we talked about the 08 offense. I mean, we're going to take Norwood out of the game, and okay, now here's Butler and the other guys. And I think, hopefully Penn State develops that ability this fall with bringing in some of the guys they bring in.
Sean, what you got? I only have one more thing for him, so I'm going to let you wrap up, and then we're gonna finish with one more question.
Yeah, just a simple question, Jay. What's the biggest thing you learned from your dad?
The best lesson I ever got from him was about parenting. And we were walking home from a game. We used to walk home from games. And I made a comment. This is before I had kids. I made a comment to him about, this kid we recruited really hadn't panned out. And I was kind of, and he said, Jay, look, number one, be patient. I said, you don't judge kids too early. But what he said to me, he goes, what you got to understand, Jay, is once you become a parent, you're only as happy as your least happy child. And he said, every kid that we recruit here, their parents raised them, or maybe just a mom, maybe just a dad, maybe it's a grandmother, whatever. But somebody somewhere put 18 years of their life into that young man. And we have an obligation to make sure, not that they're happy all the time because we just play them, but that they come out of here a better person than when they came in here. That's our number one goal. He said, winning games is obviously something we want to do, but we've got to remember that. And he said, when you become a parent, you're going to understand that a lot better. And that always stuck with me. And that changed the way I recruited. It changed the way I coached. It changed the way I did a lot of things from that. And that's going back to the 1990s when he said that to me coming home from a game. And that to me is by far, it's not give your kid a car because they want a car, but it's make sure you're teaching them what they're going to need to be successful in life. And I think that's one of the things I think, unfortunately, with the transfer portal, with NIL right now, it's all about, and the NCAA and a lot of people in the media, their approach is these guys should get whatever they want, whenever they want. And I think when you look at some of the mental health issues with this generation of college students, I think this generation of parents thinks that making kids happy is giving them whatever they want. And I think this generation wants to do more. I mean, one of the things that impresses me about Penn State students right now is they want to get involved and change the world. They want to get involved in Thon. They want to get involved in certain things. And I think it's coming back to what this generation of parents thought makes kids happy is not really what makes them happy. It doesn't fulfill them. And that really came from the lesson my dad gave me that day. And so we coach that way. I mean, look, I can tell you there's guys I coached that when I coached them, drove them nuts. And Joe drove them nuts. And now years later, they call and say, you used to piss me off when you did this, but now I get it, and that's what you want. You want them to understand that. And I think that's by far the biggest thing I learned from them.
Shit, Sean, we should have let you ask your question second, but that's fine. I was just going to ask, hey, you're running for re-election, Board of Trustees. What's your elevator pitch? What do you want to accomplish still? What do you want to, fulfill in your next term?
I think right now, as you look at Penn State, we're at a really exciting time because we have a new president and we've got a new direction. And I think one of the things is I have a good relationship with this administration. And I think this is not a time to change horses midstream of where we're at. And I can tell you, look, I've been on the board 6 years. We have never had the kind of camaraderie and the kind of synergy between the board and the administration as to what we see coming for Penn State. So I think that's important. I think we've been able to get a lot of good things done. But I think there are some big legacy things on the horizon in terms of the stadium. I want to be part of that solution because I think institutional knowledge, it's going to be hard for anybody in that board to match what I know. I mean, in 1978, when they were expanding the stadium, I was up there every 2 or 3 nights a week with my dad as a 10-year-old. It wasn't that exciting, but we were promised ice cream after every time we went to go look at the construction. So in terms of that, I think I want to make sure that what we're doing protects the fans. I think, there are things that I want to see done to make sure our students can afford to go to Penn State. That we don't create a situation where we make it unaffordable, unattainable. I want to make sure that Penn State's a place where everyone feels comfortable to come here and succeed and chase their goals. And I feel like we're at a point where the next 3 years we can get those things done in a long range manner. So that's really what's important to me across the board. So I want to get those things done, and I would love to win. I'd love to serve 3 more years, and I'd love to see those things get done, and then I can ride off in the sunset rather than run for a 4th term. Because anybody wants this job beyond 9 years. I'm not sure you want them on the board anyway. That said, in 3 years, I'll probably, who knows. But I think we're at a really, really good time. And I think Anthony Lebrano is running along with me and Alice Pope, and they're both very similarly aligned. And they really bring they've done a great job as trustees. So I hope people would vote not only for me, but for both of them as well.
Yeah, you've been very consistent with that too. So any final things you want to say, any plugs? I mean, I could go through things that you do, but it's just like, I mean, it's not like people don't know who the hell you are. So any final thoughts from you?
If they're really bored, they can follow me on Twitter at Jay Paterno or Instagram at JV Paterno. My name, J-A-Y, Paterno, by the way. Or go to JV, J-A-Y, the letter V, Paterno.com. And if they're very, very bored and they have, let's go see what this bozo's up to, they can go to the website and check that out. And even there's some things in there about the trustee election as well, if they're curious as to where I'm at on some certain things. And the one thing that my fail-safe is always going to be, I've been around this university my entire life. Love it. Live it. I mean, Tom Izzo, I thought his speech last week when he spoke at the vigil what he said was awesome because I don't like it. When he talked about, he said, Michigan State, I don't like it. I don't love it. I live it. And, I walk this campus a couple times a week. I've seen so many things change. But always in my heart, I have voted for what I thought was best for Penn State. and the students and faculty and alumni. And that to me is, I'm always going to be out up front with everybody about those things. And, you don't agree with me, and maybe people don't like what I say or what I think or how I vote. But at the end of the day, my heart's in the right place, and I'm going to try and do the right thing. So, if people are really bored and they want to find out more about me, they can go to jvpaterno.com.
I never realized that, like, the complication of, like, saying your name Jay, but then having to say Jay afterwards. That's probably plagued you your entire life. I never noticed that until right now. So,
well, we never had websites when I was a kid, so it wasn't a problem.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. I guess that's not too big of an issue. I bet people can figure it out themselves. But hey, Sean, I just logistically, I'm thinking here, we end the show tonight with this. We already get in trouble a lot of times when we put 2 to 3 hours. So I'm thinking we end the show here. We hold off on the defensive back Penn State all-time draft, and we wait till the next time on that one. What are your thoughts there, Sean?
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was an awesome discussion.
And
this is fantastic.
By the way, don't undervalue Ray Isom in that draft.
I was just talking to my father about Ray Isom. Yes.
That guy, brutal hitter.
Yep, it's so funny you say that.
Someone you might have a burner account. Somebody tweeted at us literally like 15 minutes before we went live mentioning Ray. So I feel like we might have found your burner Twitter account.
I don't have a burner account. I had to practice against him. And you never have enough scout team wideouts. So they'd be like, okay, Jay, go out and run, run across the middle. And he did, if you watch that Miami game, just brutal hitter. Just a incredible. I could go on and on, but that's one. Don't undersell him.
It's very hard to rate Penn State defensive backs because I feel like there's a lot more big hitters than necessarily like, stat patterns as far as interceptions and things go. So it'll be an interesting draft for sure next week.
Well, I know he didn't play at Penn State, but Joe still has he's tied for the career record in interceptions as DB at Brown, and that was in an era where they really weren't throwing the ball much. Of course, a lot of those throws were like punts back then, so that may have helped. But that was the one thing he used to brag about. I still got the record.
We were watching, so like when we talked about the 1947 team last week, we there was some film of the Washington State Penn State game that year. And first of all, I was surprised how much like trick plays they ran, how many like reverses they ran, but also some of the passes that they had. And I feel like every other pass was getting picked off. Like they were just throwing things over the middle.
Yeah. That defense was full of World War II veterans. They still hold a number of NCAA records.
Yes.
People don't realize how good that defensive football team that was.
We talked about that team for 2 hours last week, Sean.
Yep, we dedicated.
1947 season was something that a lot of Penn State fans don't know enough about. So that was.
No, I'm glad you guys did it. I agree with you completely.
But hey, Jay, we really appreciate it.
This was fun.
I know we said for like an hour, and you gave us twice that. So we appreciate your time.
I had a blast.
Yeah, especially on a random Wednesday in February. So we really appreciate your time.
All right, take care, guys.
Thank you, Jay.
See you guys on Twitter, I'm sure.
Yeah, you know where to find us, of course. You can leave. It's not going to affect anything, just by the way.
If I can figure out how to leave here. Oh, there we go.
It's Hotel California, actually. You're stuck. Sean, are you still there? Look at your little head.
I am still here.
Hi,
everybody.
Your head's like barely. Joey House, who was on Twitter, was the one who mentioned. That's so funny that he's here. Is that better? There you are.
Yep.
That's so funny. So anyway, for those on YouTube, first of all, I apologize that you are getting some announcers during the highlights. So I highly recommend you go back and check out the podcast form, because that will not have the YouTube audio in there as far as the highlights go. But I don't want this to go more than a couple more minutes, Sean. But first of all, thank you to Jay Paterno for giving us 2 hours and 20 minutes of his time. I was very impressed. That's maybe that's a understatement, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
That was a great discussion, and it was very wide ranging. And I mean, he was very, very, very transparent, and I mean, automatic friend of the show for sure. And it's funny he brought up Ray Isom, because I was just talking about Ray Isom with my father, and because I'm trying to put my list together, and I'm asking because and Corey, I'm sure you ran into the same thing. We don't have the eye test for a lot of these older guys, so I want to talk to somebody who has it, and if it's a close call between somebody from back then and maybe somebody who I saw, I want to get their read on it. So it's just so funny that he brought up Ray Isom.
Yeah, I want to give him credit because we asked what I thought were going to be some tougher questions tonight, and he didn't stray away from it. So I respect that, and I'm very, very happy. I mean, we were an hour in, and I was like halfway through what we wanted to cover, and I was like, we got a lot more to still discuss, and he didn't waver at all. So
I was thinking the same thing. The thing is, we had follow-up questions because he would say something interesting, and then we'd be like, well, we want to know more about this. And that's the way a discussion should go on a pod. So
absolutely.
I think if you stuck with us all the way through, it was an awesome podcast tonight.
Yeah, and if you had to listen in 2 different segments, which I know some of you do, that's okay too. What's his name? Was it Tyler out who Instagrammed us? That was just one podcast for him on his way out to where he's working. But hey, if you're on YouTube, if you haven't already subscribed, please consider doing that. Please liking. If you're listening on a podcast and for some reason you're not subscribed wherever you're listening, please do that as well. We're going to end the show there. We'll be back next week. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but we will come back with the defensive backs draft, and we'll go from there. So again, thank you to Joe Paterno for his time. Thank you to Sean. I'm not going to say thank you to myself, obviously, but we did a lot of kind of back work to make sure we were prepared for tonight. So it was everything that we kind of wanted. So thank you guys so much.
I will thank you, Corey.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You've been listening to Hardcore Penn State Football. I'm Corey Listoki. That's Sean Kane. Until next week, have a good one, everybody.